About 2 years ago, my nana brought home a Ouija board that she found at a yard sale. I've always been a true believer in the paranormal, and it's always been one of my peak interests. I've heard and read enough stories and watched enough shows to know not to mess around with a Ouija board, and quite frankly they sort of freaked me out, so I wanted nothing to do with it. My nana, on the other hand, doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and thought it would be a fun game for myself, my brother, and the oldest of my 2 cousins. I left it on the dining room table for days before she made me put it away. I ended up sliding it under my bed in the hopes of just forgetting about it. My brother of 11 and my cousin of 12 bugged me about it constantly because they wanted to play with it and I wouldn't let them. I tried to explain it to them that it wasn't just a game and that it shouldn't be messed with, but they were preteen boys who couldn't help but do things they shouldn't. One day after I got home from work, the boys were there, and I had this sneaking suspicion they played with it. I looked under my bed and it was there, but I had this odd feeling, and when I went downstairs and interrogated them about it, at first they denied it, but I saw right through them and they finally admitted that they had played with it. I asked them if they had said goodbye when they were done, and they said they did. My cousin likes to over-exaggerate stories big time, and make up details to be overly dramatic. So when he told me about a couple of things that supposedly happened, I didn't believe him at all. Also, they were boys who liked to mess with each other, so I assumed that that was happening now. A couple of nights later I got into bed, and as I lay there trying to fall asleep, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. I look over at my closet that has 2 large sliding doors, and I notice that one of the doors is slightly ajar, which left a small space between the doors. It creeped me out for some reason, so I turned and faced the other way, trying to ignore everything and fall asleep. I finally fell asleep, and the next thing I know, I'm woken up by what felt like someone or something hitting me in the back of the head. I was laying on my back, so the back of my head was fully on my pillow, which made it even weirder. And it wasn't a light hit either. It freaked me out so much I was shaking. I look around my room and don't see anything, but then, all of a sudden, I hear my floor creaking like someone is walking around my bed. I'm so freaked out at this point it wasn't funny. After laying there a good little while, I finally got the courage to get up and grab my phone and book it to my living room. I sat down and tried to calm, but I still could feel a tingling, pulsing sensation on the back of my head. I turned on my phone and realized it was 3 a.m. I called my boyfriend, now husband, with tears streaming down my face from being so freaked out. He didn't pick up, and I swear I called him another 15 to 20 times before I finally gave up. I sat in the chair until my nana got up around 6. I didn't tell her what happened, because I knew she wouldn't believe me and say that I was acting dumb. After she got up, I had breakfast, and called my boyfriend again, and he finally answered. He told me he had his phone on silent, so he didn't know that I had been calling. I gave him so much crap for this, and told him what happened, and he felt so bad and like an idiot for having his phone on silent. He told me he would have come over in a heartbeat to comfort me, and was so apologetic. Later that day he never came over, and we took the Ouija board to a junkyard to get rid of it. My husband is the only one in my family that knows what happened, and I didn't experience anything after I got rid of it. Moral of the story? Ouija boards shouldn't be messed with. I am a 25-year-old and live in the UK. I've always believed in the paranormal and have had a few experiences in my life, and have been told by a medium that I am sensitive to it. This particular experience happened at my Aunt Claire's house when I was around 10. She used to live in a small 2-bedroom house in a town called Greenhill. Many things happened in this house in the few years that she lived there, and I can safely say I am so glad that she moved away from this awful, accursed home. It started out with small little things, like footsteps being heard when no one was moving around the house, and things moving by themselves, as well as shadows out of the corner of your eye. But things took a pretty sinister turn in the space of a week when a few key events happened. The first scary thing that occurred was between myself and my aunt's two sons, Tyler and Seb. We spent a lot of time in the backyard playing in the mud and climbing trees, but on this particular day, we opted to dig a hole for some reason. I don't really remember why, but regardless, we dug at the dirt at the bottom of the garden. This garden was long and led to the forest and fields on the back of the house. It was cut off from them with an old rotten wooded fence. We chose to dig in the middle of the trees at a particularly muddy area, and as soon as we hit something hard, we decided to dig it out, assuming as children that it was some lost treasure we were unearthing and that we had hit the jackpot. Instead, as we dug, we found a skull. We screamed for my aunt and mum and showed them, and they looked at each other mumbling about being someone's old pet, but at the time I thought nothing of it, but would find out at the age of 18 it was the skull of a baby, and that my aunt never managed to find out any information on it even after taking it to the police. This would then start a chain of events that none of us foresaw. It happened on firework night, and myself, Seb, Tyler, Claire, my mum and dad and my aunt's boyfriend were chilling downstairs. All the kids bar myself were asleep, when we heard the sound of boots on the floor above us, which was impossible, as we were the only ones home and everyone was accounted for in the living room. My aunt shrugged it off and said that it must be pipes. A while later, I walked past the stairway to get into the kitchen, and from the corner of my eye, I saw something that resembled the large shadow of a man swinging from the ceiling of the landing. I stopped and let out a little shriek, and it was gone. My aunt asked me what I'd seen, and I told her, and she looked sick. I was later to learn that this is a regular occurrence. Along with the occurrence was one that I myself had witnessed when asleep in bed, when we had stayed over for the night, as we did often. Both the boys would be in bed, and you would hear children's laughter and running through the house. Later that night, scratching could be heard throughout the house, but could never be placed, as each time you thought you had pinned it, it would move to the opposite wall or area you were at. We were watching a film called Silence of the Lambs, which certainly didn't help the atmosphere. Great film, by the way. And halfway through the film, my dad left to get takeout, so the movie was paused as we all sat laughing and talking, when an almighty boom resounded through the house coming from upstairs. We all leaped upstairs, including my sleeping cousins, who awoke, startled and confused. We proceeded to follow my aunt's boyfriend upstairs to investigate, and on first glance nothing seemed to be amiss. All the doors were open, and nothing seemed to have fallen. This all changed when my aunt's son Tyler asked, "Mum, what's that?" pointing to something laying against the wall. My aunt bent to pick it up and almost threw it at my mum, gasping, "My God." I looked at my mum, who was holding a small white and pink laced baby shoe that had small dark patches on it. Everyone had gone as white as a ghost and looked startled. I should now say that my aunt had no girls at the time, and the boys were 9 and 6. This is when my mum looked up and shouted, "Claire, the attic's open. How the hell is it open?" When I tell you the attic's open, I don't just mean it was unsealed. See, in this house, in the attic, you'd need to push up and slide across to open it. And rarely do they have ladders, at least these houses don't. This particular attic wasn't just open, but the lid had been completely pushed up and moved to the inside of it. So the attic was now completely open, and you could see all the darkness above and the shininess of the plastic bin bags ahead. This was insane, as before my aunt had moved in, the attic had been checked and resealed, as the attic was completely empty and had new heat protection in there, so there should be no black bags in there. The reason the opening of the attic was also so terrifying is because the attic had been painted over and sealed with a special sealant to keep it and to stop any draft from coming through it. My aunt's boyfriend then retrieved the bag to find that it was a bag of baby clothes that had never been seen there before and did not belong to my aunt. We were all rushed downstairs, and a few hours later my dad and my aunt's boyfriend had a fire going and burnt the shoe and baby clothes. I still today don't know what was on the baby's shoe, and I have never wanted to ask for fear of an answer. The story does not end here though. After this event, the feeling in the house got worse and became a dark and scary place to stay. And you could feel as though you were being watched and would often feel someone breathe on your neck. My aunt only managed to cope for a year when she decided to move away and get out the house. 6 months after she left, there was a house fire there, and the man who lived there sadly passed away. But this got my aunt interested, and she looked into the history of the house and was horrified to discover upon researching that the house had a dark past, which had meant that every household had either lost one member or the family in its entirety who occupied it. This is where things started to make sense. The man who lived there before had had severe depression and ended his life on the landing light fixture. The family beforehand had lost members to carbon monoxide poisoning, and the family before that had lost a child and a family pet to a house fire. The record she found only went back so far, but there's still so much unknown about the house. We, however, believe that the house was cursed, and my aunt was lucky to have gotten out alive with her entire family. I know the house is still there, and my ex-fiancé lives not too far away from it, but I have no desire to go back and find out what happened to anyone else who lived there, and it was a really dark and scary time for me and my aunt. We've never looked back, and personally I avoid going anywhere near it. I used to be afraid of cats. There was no incident, no deep-rooted trauma, no anything I could or can name. My mum hated them, never let me around them, and I suppose from there, ignorance spread fear. When a stray feline wandered onto our driveway, I would let out a little squeal of fear and dart into the house, and that would be as close as I got. I used to be afraid of cats, until Holly. Holly and I spent our younger years together from elementary to middle school, 3rd grade to 8th. I slept over at her place every week, and we'd wander downtown from the local market to the nearby park to the city mall, each year going a little farther and growing in our confidence. When we were 11 and 12, I slept over at her house as usual, watching horror movies until the wee hours of the morning and telling jokes we were too young to know. The afternoon came, and I learned Holly's older brother Isaiah had a piano lesson at their church. Already a godless little heathen, I wanted to stay at their house and play Smash on Isaiah's Wii, but Holly convinced me to tag along, saying we could play in their yard, and she could finally introduce me to a cat. I eventually agreed, and into the minivan we piled. Her mum dropped us off and went to run errands. Isaiah strode towards the main building, and Holly and I went trampling through the long grass, a row of houses laid on dilapidated property, on the other side of broken down fences. These houses and these buildings lay beside an empty road. Holly squatted down next to a hole in the fence and started clicking her tongue on the roof of her mouth. I stared at her blankly for a few moments before looking towards the road. No cars, no people, nothing. When I finally look back, I see her holding a dark grey cat. Even my inexperienced eyes could tell she was older, and based on the unimpressive look on her mushy little face, she was probably accustomed to being picked up by children. Holly explained that this was Bubbles, who constantly wandered over to the field outside the church in search of food, or butterflies or whatever else cats look for. He'd been doing it for years, so being picked up by children was nothing new for him. In short, he was the perfect cat for a girl afraid of cats to try and meet. I let Holly carry him as we wandered around the field, occasionally leaning over to give him a tentative pet. When boredom, as it inevitably does, infected us, we set our sights on the building closest to us. It was technically a church property, and Holly explained that, but they rarely used it. Some classes were held in the upper levels, but usually the bottom floor and entire building were deserted. What were we to do? 2 girls and a cat walked into a bar, and I forget how the rest of this joke goes, so we wandered into the building, Bubbles meowing softly, but not sounding bothered. Most of the halls were speckled with dust, sunlight filtering in through dirty and shuttered windows. There are no lights on, and while we see switches all over the place, we're unwilling to turn them on. Maybe we just like the creepy atmosphere, but trapezing around like this is thrilling. When I ask her if we'll get in trouble for being here, she rolls her eyes and tells me to relax. That since her brother is here taking a lesson in the other building, we're allowed to be here. But maybe we should avoid getting caught. You know, just in case. The building had multiple exits, each leading to a different little area. One is closer to the main church building where Isaiah is. Another borders a small patch of woods, or at least a gathering of trees and flowers and squirrels. Yet another leads to a dirt road that spirals away to somewhere Holly and I don't know. As we pick our way through the hallways, we find a small banquet room. 3 dozen tables with long tablecloths pooling on the floor. 2 doors leading to a kitchen. As Holly and I walk towards the doors, our voices, a low whisper and laced with giggles, we hear it. A slam. We look at each other, Bubbles grumbling at the sudden sound, inconsistent footsteps echoing down the hallway, stomping and stumbling and sliding along the linoleum floors, slumping into the walls and slurring speech. It's a man, and because I don't speak the language, it's all I can gather. Is this what a drunk person's like? It had to be. I don't know what he's saying, but I can recognize the language, and I look to Holly. I can tell she understands because her face is pale. We hold our breath, praying to the god of this building, but the man is getting closer. Holly grips my arm and drags me towards one of the tables. Immediately understanding what she wants, I crawl under the table, waiting for her to join me before pulling the tablecloth back down. We stayed silent, shaking, listening to the drunken man enter the room. I still can't tell what he's saying, but he certainly sounds agitated. He didn't sound that close to us, but who would want him to get closer? We cover our mouths, tried to stop breathing altogether, and sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only more than a few minutes. Bubbles purred and meowed lightly every once in a while, but he was quiet and quickly stopped when we showed him some affection. The footsteps finally disappeared down the hallway we'd come from. I turned to Holly, opening my mouth to talk when she stops me. Ozzy, let's get out of here. I nod in agreement and squirm out from under the table, the 2 of us silently making our way down the hall that the man had just stumbled from. We emerged on the dirt road and without a second thought circled around the building back towards the door we'd entered from. Maybe the man was still stumbling through the building, or perhaps he'd already left. But when we entered the field, we were once again alone. Holly never told me what the man was saying, and like stupid children, we didn't tell anyone what happened. We didn't want to get in trouble for trespassing after all. I never found out what he said since Holly didn't want to talk about it. And understandably, I haven't been back to that place since. To start off, this incident occurred in a small town community, where it's not really crime-ridden or exactly dangerous. Around this time of year, I was working full-time at a little Japanese retailer shop at a mall near my house. My schedule fluctuated, but the majority of my shifts were closing shifts. I preferred this because it gave me enough time to sleep in, make myself a lunch, catch the bus, and get to the mall a bit early to buy snacks and a drink before I begin my dreaded 8.5-hour shift. On one particular day, I was getting ready to walk to the bus stop. I saw a big commotion going on right outside from my house at the town hall. I crossed the street right in time before several other police cars and an ambulance rushed by, sirens wailing so loud. I'm sure the entire neighborhood heard. I was wondering what was going on but quickly disregarded it. As I got on the first bus near my house, I got off at the intersection where I'm supposed to take a second bus that leads me straight to the terminal across the mall. While I was waiting at the shelter, I see a guy around my age in his 20s staring at me. His eyes were black and empty. Mind you, there was no one else around besides the two of us. I remember thinking to myself that it seemed odd he was wearing a sweater with a heavy-looking backpack and construction boots, both of which looked oversized for his tall, slim figure. When it was blazingly hot outside, not even for a split second did he once tear his gaze away from me. But it quickly hit me that I recognized him as a regular customer that frequently comes in to buy earphones at the store I worked at. Now, I usually try to keep to myself, but for some reason, and I've been told I draw all kinds of people to me with my friendly positive aura, I felt the need to pretend I was on my phone to avoid any sort of conversation. He then proceeded to take a seat beside me. Still gazing at me, I mustered a "Hi," before going on that he recognized me from work, and if I was going there right now. When the bus finally arrived, we both got on, and he took a seat next to me. We had small talk about random stuff and our hobbies. He went on to tell me about his broken relationship with his parents, where he ended up getting kicked out. I assumed he was homeless at first, but he kind of confirmed it subtly when he told me he's been couch surfing between friends' houses. We finally reached the bus terminal. That's across the mall. He ended up walking me to my work. I didn't ask him to do this, and before going off his own way, he asked for my number, which I stupidly gave him. He told me, if you ever want to smoke and chill, just text me. After conversing with him, I shrugged off any preconceived judgments I had of him earlier of being creepy. For just a guy that's socially awkward and perna-fried, he ended up texting me later on that night, asking me out to hang. But I cut the conversation short, telling him I was tired and also that I had work the next day. I never heard from him again. Now here's where things get really interesting. After a few days and then weeks, news reports was coming out that there was a violent assault that occurred right where the trails were across my house, near the town hall. The victim was a teenage girl who was going for a walk when she was struck by an unknown object by the suspect, who happened to be armed, and proceeded to assault her in that way before leaving the scene. It took about a week for the police to find the suspect, and the investigation was ongoing. It shook up the entire community. Nothing like this had ever happened before. It's fairly peaceful and close-knit. It's scary because it happened right in broad daylight. So when police released images of the suspect with his name following his arrest, I damn near had a heart attack. It was him, the same guy who I'd met at the bus stop, who walked me to work, who asked for my number, who was sitting texting me through the day after committing the crime. He had the same dark, black, empty eyes, long hair, and wearing the exact sweater, backpack and shoes. I started looking at the past news reports to compare the dates and times to when he texted me, and they all matched. Needless to say, my intuition about people are on and off. that I should learn to trust it more. I felt a bit of guilt, hoping I could have done something earlier, but there was no way for me to know until after. I really hope to never meet him again. When I was in my early 20s, I was very mentally unstable, lonely and desperate for friends. I've struggled with binge eating, and it was particularly bad at this time, with a lot of deliveries and late-night fast food binges. One night that I order pizza, this man delivers it. He's perhaps between his mid-30s and 40s, and I think I was about 20 at the time. We don't have any particularly engaging conversation. It was a normal friendly pizza delivery driver conversation. He may have complimented me on my piercings or hair at the time, but this was a decade ago. I do know that there was nothing that indicated I wanted to be friends, and that this was simply a customer-driven interaction. I think it was a day or so later that he adds me on Facebook. I want to emphasize that this was days later, meaning he took my information home or noted it somewhere. It took me a minute to figure out who he was, as I am autistic and had a hard time recognizing faces, especially putting faces to names, and realized he found me based off my order information. Being unstable, lonely and desperate for friends, and also living by, I make decisions based on whether it will or will not make a good story, I accepted the friend request. He left some creepy, typical, over-sexual compliments on Facebook photos, but we never met or talked or anything ever again, and I think I deleted him a little while later. This delivery driver was almost twice my age at the time, and decided after less than 10 minutes interaction with me to find me on Facebook. I honestly hope to never meet him again, and I hope that no one else does either, or if you do, that they were smarter and in a better place than I am. I probably should have reported it to the company, but you know, hindsight's 20/20. I also want to note that I've had delivery drivers creepily try to flirt with me, and it's the worst. Please, let me eat my greasy food in peace. I've got an interesting story I would like to share with you. So, family from my mother's side have been having some strange events happen to them. My maternal grandfather talked about his mum and dad standing around him 3 days before he passed, and the day he did die, he told my aunt that his parents were in the room and telling him that he would be joining them at 2:30 that night. He breathed his last that hour. My maternal uncle woke up suddenly in the dead of night, and his wife asked him where did he think he was going at 3 a.m. He replied that his mother was outside asking him to come over to her. He died within 20 minutes. My late mother asked me once who was the third person besides you and your father as you were talking to me. I replied no one. Later she said her parents were there saying that she would be with them shortly and that they would have to come and take her. Sometime later she named a few more folks standing around her and passed away shortly after. But the strangest of all these occurrences is that of a 28-year-old man, the son of a very close family friend of my parents-in-law. It baffles me to this day. He was visiting his parents on leave from Moscow, where he was stationed as part of a MNC staff. His younger sister was getting married and the house was packed with guests. He woke up at 12:30 at night, was a bit panicky. His Russian wife called in his elder brother, who found his youngest brother crying in a state of panic. The younger man asked for his mother, and once she arrived, asked for her to stay with him, since they would arrive at 4 a.m. to take him. The guy was clean, had always been drug-free. His elder brother suggested they visit a hospital and let them run whatever tests they need to. Maybe he was suffering from something, and perhaps it was just a nightmare. But he agreed and insisted that his mother came along. They brought him to a nearby facility. The ER docs and nurses were skeptical, but they ran the tests anyway. Alcohol, drugs, EKG, and a few others, all normal. They told him that he was as fit as a fiddle and could proceed home. However, the young man was still panicky, and at the insistence of the family, the hospital agreed to detain him until morning. A few minutes before 4 a.m. he said, "They have arrived. They are tall, many of them in white robes. Their faces are covered and they are angels. They are all surrounding my bed and the room is full of them." At precisely 4 a.m. he went limp, ceased breathing, and was declared dead. I was a pizza delivery driver, and I had a regular that was saved in the computer as Mike from around the corner. Whenever I delivered, he was super messed up. On more than one occasion, I had to let myself in because he was playing his drum set with his headphones on, completely on booze and drugs. One time he was passed out and drooling on the coffee table. I called the cops, but he was okay. I saw him a year later at his day job and he didn't even know who I was. He was never sober when I delivered. When I was in high school in my senior year, I was around 5'3" and 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out he was cheating. Well, there were usually a few of us girls waiting there, but this day I was the only one. So I sat at a bench and had one headphone in and one out so that I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, two big men got out. I immediately messaged my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. He of course didn't reply, so I copy-pasted the same message to my cousin who was home, as I lived with my aunt and two cousins, who were unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make, the color, and plus it was two men, but I didn't get a response. When they got out of their car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little late. As I stood by the street, the men walked up to me and I could feel their bad energy. One guy said hello and the other stood there staring at me. I just did a little smile and nod and looked away. Then the same guy asked how old I was, to which I didn't reply. I could tell the second guy was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then the first guy kept asking me questions like if I have a boyfriend, if I live close, and if I'm into narcotics. He then proceeded to tell me he had some and asked if I wanted it, and if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body, and I got the chills. The second one, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me that they just got back from Russia. But the way he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to get into their car, because they have things they think I'll want. I said no thank you, and trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either, and I would never get into someone's car that I didn't know. The first one then asked if I even had a car. To which I said no, but that my bus is almost here and that sorry I have to go. And by some sort of miracle the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer when they asked me my questions. But before the bus got to me, the first one handed me a card and said that he was a car shop dealer, and to call him sometime if I needed anything. He even said he'd give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew I needed that number to report it. So I took it and they walked off super fast. Finally the bus stopped and picked me up, and as soon as I got on I began crying. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and my body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what happened. When she looked around for the car, of course, they were gone. She said she saw them around me, but she thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there was an incident, so that they could notify the school. She continued picking up all the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out, and so did campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men, and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and the questions that the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. Then I pulled out the card they gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security guard and said that he was going to call it and act like my dad. So he did. I was on speaker and the first guy answered. I knew his voice as it was burnt into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card, and as soon as he said that, the guy hung up. They tried calling again, but the phone was cut off, then eventually disconnected. They could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got on his phone and called the cops, and they came to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything they were saying. "She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to get her parents to get her." When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the car being used was a bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick and couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that finally picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked with him, and the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, mum and cousin were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by two guys. The other kid stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out the car. The principal called me into the office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there that made me choose the two guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out fast and they were caught. It was in fact those two guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad she went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared, but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year, and my boyfriend, now ex, also took me on several days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courage of the kids at her high school. Back in the 80s, I was in college and lived in a dorm room. I never owned a Ouija board, but if someone had one, then I'd either watch or participate. To be honest, this was one of the first times I ever used it. I had a question for the board. My grandmother had my father when she was young and single. That was a big deal back in the 1930s. When she found out she was pregnant, she ran away from home, dropped my father off at her parents' house when he was 6 months old and left, coming to visit less and less frequently. By the time he was 5, she'd never come back at all and vanished. So my father was raised by an aunt, never really knew his mother, and didn't have any idea who his father was. By the time he was in his 40s, he wanted to find her. Lots of dead ends, but he eventually did. Anyway, that night I asked the board if my grandmother was alive. The board said yes, and I asked if she lived in my home state. The board said yes. I asked if she lived in my hometown. The board said yes. I asked what street she lived on, and the board spelled out the name of the street, Washington Street. At the time, I wasn't sure if there was a Washington Street in my hometown, but it turns out there was. No, Grandma didn't live there, but 2 years later, my father found his mum. She lived in my home state, in the town of Washington. It wasn't the street's name, it was the town's name. How messed up is that? More than 30 years later, I still have no explanation. I am a 25-year-old female, and this happened about 2.5 years ago, in the winter of 2017. My girlfriend and I were living in the centre of a popular and busy street in England, in a ground floor flat. The street we lived on was just off a very busy road that had about 1,000 pubs on it, so it was normally quite populated most hours of the day. The flat we lived on was about 7 in an old converted bakery. There was a very large, locked wooden gate with a buzzer, and the flats were all in a courtyard behind the gate. We shared the flat with my mum. Our bedroom windows faced directly onto the street where people would walk past on the pavement. On this given night, it must have been about 2 a.m. My girlfriend and I were laying on my bed watching a film on my laptop. My bedroom, like most UK bedrooms, was a tiny, shoebox-sized room with a bed and a wardrobe and about 5 square feet of extra floor space. Comfy. My window was right next to my bed and faced out onto the street. As we were laying on my bed, someone knocked on the window. That wasn't unusual. I had quite a few friends that lived and worked near my flat, so we didn't think much of it. We continued watching our film and settled down. And about half hour to 45 minutes later, there was a massive bang on my window that sounded like someone slammed their fists against it and ran off. We were a bit startled and decided to go take a look outside, as it was evidently not one of my friends at this point. We went into the courtyard and opened the main gate and couldn't see anyone on the street at all. It was freezing and snowing, but still unusually quiet. We stood there for about 5 minutes, just looking around. I noticed a small man on the other side of the street, wearing a mid-length trench coat and heavy boots. But as my eyesight is awful, and I never wear my glasses, I didn't actually see any discerning features. He was on the opposite side of the street, and I was walking along the street from the main road, from left to right, up towards our flat. I just got a bit of a strange vibe from him, and pointed him out to my girlfriend. We both just stood and watched for a few minutes, and as he passed, he didn't turn to look at us or anything. After less than a minute, I looked to my right and saw that this same guy had now crossed over to our side of the street and was walking towards us. My girlfriend and I watched for a minute, and then proceeded to panic and shut ourselves behind the gate. Instead of going back into our flat, we crouched down out of sight, so we could watch through the gap under the gate to see if he passed by. The thing I remember the most vividly is the sound of his boots creaking on the snow, and watching him come to a dead stop directly outside the gate. My girlfriend and I were both now suitably crapping ourselves, and were quietly hurried back inside. Our flat had an open-plan kitchen and living room, with a door that led to the straight hallway. My bedroom was right off at the end of the hallway, and my mum was off to the right. All the lights were off, and I poked my head into the hall, and I had a clear line of sight into my bedroom from there. When I looked, I could see the silhouette of this man pacing up and down slowly outside my bedroom window. My mum had slept soundlessly through all of it, but I decided to go in and wake her up to let her know what was going on. She brushed it off until I told her to look outside, and she saw this man now pacing back and forth outside her window and mine, knowing that at the right angle you could see through my blinds from outside. I pressed myself up against the wall and scooted my way down the hallway back to the living room and rang the police. My girlfriend and I weren't really sure what to make of the situation, but it felt pretty ominous. The police arrived not 10 minutes later, met me outside and said they found him. He claimed to be homeless looking for a place to stay, but he was very well dressed and clean shaven and had no other possessions with him. The police officer offered forth the fact that it's more likely he was intrigued by the fact that there were two obviously queer young females in bed together and he was having a little snoop. But who knows? The next day I was outside having a cigarette with my girlfriend and I noticed a very prominent, sticky handprint on my window. You know, as if someone had their hand pressed up against it. No, thank you. My girlfriend swears she saw him at the train station a few months later. So trenchcoat man, let's never meet again, you absolute creep. Many moons ago in the early 2000s, my friend Sarah was going to the local state college. Now while the college was in the city, she lived out in the country with her father and would use the bus system to get to and from school. One afternoon after class, her and her friends went out to one of their apartments to study for some exams. Well, being the young and responsible young adults they were, they studied for perhaps 10 minutes before things turned into more of a festive gathering. After a few hours, Sarah happens to look at the clock, which caused her mind to snap. What time does the last bus run, she thinks? Screaming profanities and prayers warding off her demise by her father, she quickly ran to the bus stop just in time to catch its final trip of the night. With a huge sigh of relief, she flopped down onto a seat in the back and threw her headphones on, lost in thoughts of what elaborate tales to tell her father. She hadn't noticed a little boy walking up to her until she noticed movement from the corner of her eye as she sat down beside her. She somehow managed not to recoil at the sight of the child, because while the child was completely filthy and reminded her of someone from Deliverance, it was his creepy smile that she remembered most. He sat there, smiling at her, until she slowly slid her headphones down, and the following interaction began. Hello? Hello. Hey. You're pretty. Thank you. What's your name? Now, Sarah had this policy of never giving any personal information to strangers, but kids were usually harmless in her opinion. But every alarm bell was ringing in her head. My name is Katie. What a lovely name. Well, I like it. Then the kid just sat there smiling at her. After a few minutes of smiling, the kid finally said, "You'd make a great mum," and hopped down and walked back to an even more dirty and unkempt monster of a man, who she could only assume was the boy's father. Because, just like his son, he was smiling at her. When she looked at him, he nodded politely and kept smiling. She put her headphones back on and dug out a book to pretend to study, but she kept looking back and noticed both of them smiling right at her. As each stop came up and went, she prayed they would get off, but as the bus began to empty of the other passengers, she soon found out it was just her, some middle-aged woman, and these two. The bus was beginning to slow for its next stop in a small town that had a series of restaurants. She couldn't take them anymore, and decided it would be safer for her to go to the McDonald's and wait for her father than sit on a bus any longer. So she gathered all her things and prepared to disembark. As she allowed the woman to pass, she noticed the man gathering his things. Ah, hell no, she thought. But she didn't want to make out like she was trying to avoid them, so she moved to the seat near the front and sat back down. To her horror, she watched as the man and his son took another seat and sat back down, still smiling and nodding. Her anxiety was through the roof at this point as she watched more stops come and go until hers was coming up. What was she going to do? Her mind raced. As the bus came to a stop, she gathered her things again and watched in horror as the man gathered his things. Instead of getting off, she sat back down again behind the driver. "How much further till the end of the line?" she asked. "3 more stops," the driver said. Sarah then leaned in and told the driver about the man and his son and asked if it was possible to have the police there when they arrived. The driver looked in the mirror and then told her he'd take care of it. Sarah glanced back and her heart jumped into her throat, as while the little boy was still smiling at her, the father wasn't. She described it as the look a parent gives their child when they've done something wrong, and wait till we get home. Now Sarah was usually a very strong individual, but she was in tears as she looked out at her phone and tried to call her father, which only led to voicemail. Who else could she call? She finally decided to call her ex. He may have been a disloyal POS, but she could always rely on him when it counted most. "Hello?" Jack said. Quietly as she could, she poured her heart out about what was happening and asked if he could meet her at the last stop. "I'm in Rogers right now and it will take me 20 minutes to get there, but I'll be there as fast as I can." "Please hurry," she begged. Finally, they came over the hill to where the final stop was. Frantically, she looked for something, anything that could help her, but there was nothing. Finally, the bus pulled in and the door swung open. The man glared down at her, waiting for her to get off first. The driver said, "Hold up, miss. I need to talk to you about your bus pass." The man stood there for a moment until the driver told him that it was the last stop and he needed to get off. The man replied, "I'm waiting for my..." "Sir, you need to get off. If you're waiting for her, she'll be along shortly, but I need you to get off now." Angrily, the man stomped off with his child in tow. As soon as they got off, the driver shut the door. "What the..." The man began yelling and banging on the door as Sarah was scared he was going to break the glass until she noticed 2 police cars pulling in, followed shortly by Jack. The police ordered the man away to them, and she couldn't hear what was being said. Jack later revealed the man was claiming that Sarah was his daughter and he was taking her home. Once Jack asked him her name and he said it was Katie. That was all she wrote. In the end, the man got into a fight with Jack and the officers, but was finally arrested. When she got home and told her father what happened, she tossed her keys into the old 82 Ram, and she was to never ride the bus again. While it was loud and a pain to drive, she'd never felt safer. But she did ride the bus one final time after that, when she delivered a plate of cookies to the driver who saved her life. Sarah's been okay for a while now for the most part. She went to therapy and the support of friends and family helped a lot. She still has trouble being alone, and she does have things that remind her of the night. The stories of attempted abduction really make her wonder what would have become of her if things had turned out differently. She also never wanted to be someone who falsely accused someone, which is why she didn't act sooner. But as for the guy's intentions, he never indicated he was just selling Boy Scout cookies. The kid, she doesn't know what happened to him. Her mind was more focused on the father and getting the hell home ASAP, to the whirlwind of what just happened. And how long ago this was? She thinks the child was taken with the father. The excuse of "she's my daughter" was told to her by her ex, since she was still on the bus, and she was never told if they tried any other excuses. She also wants to let everyone know the history behind her and Jack was that they started out as childhood friends, and as they grew up in the same neighborhood, they were close. But as they matured, Jack became a huge player and was going through women left, right, and center. She doesn't recall why, but they both thought a relationship would work, and when it failed, she acknowledged that that is just how he was, and that she knew it was going to. It didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. At least they were able to stay good friends afterwards. I work as a delivery driver. This happened last Thursday, and for the sake of what will eventually become time-sensitive context, we have to wear a mask at work currently due to the pandemic. I was making a stop and doing my usual drops. It was nothing unusual at all. Pulling the second-to-last set of rotors out of the truck and carrying them to the open bay to set them. A customer of the place I was delivering to walked out of the side door and almost directly into me. A quick stop and turn on my heels with a laugh and oops, pardon me, and I had made it around them and into the bay without making eye contact. I turn around and see this, at my guess, late 30s brown-haired woman staring at me like I had just insulted her very existence. "Why are you wearing that?" she demanded, pointing at her mouth. I raised an eyebrow but decided I wasn't getting involved with whatever this attitude was. One of the mechanics is now also giving a 1,000-yard stare at this woman like she's lost her mind. I walk on by since she's not in my way and grab the last set of rotors, and she is now death glaring at me. "It's rude to ignore people," she barked. "While dealing with this isn't part of my job," I remarked to my amusement. Our vehicles are unmarked and I wear regular clothes to work so I can trash talk my own reputation without reflecting my work. Karen was not done going crazy yet, however. "Are you sick? Why are you out here if you're sick? You shouldn't be delivering anything." At this point I had delivered everything and was shutting the back door. "No wonder they don't let you into the shop if you infect everyone." Sure I would. Have a nice day." "You're as sick as it gets." Insert some language here that I've never heard before, and insert another 3 lines of it as I start the truck. She has now crossed the street to a van I believe is hers, and is still hand-speaking as she yells, "It's not a joke getting people sick, it isn't funny, what's wrong with you?" I'd had enough to deal with the job, so I simply waved and pulled away. I've run into worse, but never someone who's offended to be apologized to, and what made this so strange is the topic. She was screaming at me about getting sick, but at no point from the movement she nearly ran into me to the moment she went to her van did she avoid or move away from me in any way, and the entire time she was glaring at me like the mere fact someone else was anywhere near her was an insult to her very existence. Last but not least, someone so worried about getting sick, then why was she not wearing a mask? I am the youngest of 4 brothers, all a year apart. At this time I was about 9, and our family friend was spending the night at our place. We lived in a 2-story house with a basement. At this time our mother was single and dating a lot, so during this particular night she was away. We saw how to make a Ouija board on this episode of a show called Mystery Hunters, a Canadian kids channel. YTV. So we decided it would be a fun thing to try while we had the house to ourselves. So we cut up an old cardboard box and made a Ouija board from it. We put felt on the bottom of the triangle thing so that it would slide better, and it worked pretty well. We all tried putting our fingers on the triangle and asking questions, but got no response. Then me and my brother asked a question to the likes of, "Is there a demon here?" And the triangle started to move. We looked at each other and the expression on our faces showed that it was neither of us moving the triangle. We immediately got scared and ran into the kitchen. When we got there, we heard a crash come from the living room. It sounded like our TV fell off the wall unit. But when we ran back, we saw that nothing was wrong. After this, we decided to grab a Bible and read. The first words we read in unison were, "God's people are doomed." Frightened by this, we turned on the TV and saw it was Dave Chappelle, so we assumed it was going to be something funny. But when the audio began, the first words from Dave were, "And all the people died," to which the audience started laughing, and then it went to a commercial. Freaked out by both of these strange and unlikely things happening, the waterworks began, and we got up and ran upstairs crying and screaming to my brother's bedroom. When we got up the stairs and into his bedroom, we heard footsteps that sounded exactly like ours run up the stairs after us. Immediately I assumed it was one of my brothers or our friends late up the stairs. But then we realized we were all in the room and no one passed by the door. We began to panic, so we held each other, freaking out. It's hard to say if we heard anything after this point, so this was the last that happened for now. 2 hours later, me and my brother, the bravest of the four, decided that this might be all in our heads, and that we would go play video games on my mum's computer in her office, Diablo 2 to be exact. The door to her office had no handle, so my brother pushed the door open, and immediately after he pushed the door, it slammed back on his arm, and all the way from the basement we heard clear and loud laughter. The only way I can describe it is it was the sound of a witch that echoed through the entire house. At this point we ran down the stairs, out the door into my grandmother's house, which was down the street, and waited for Mum to come home. I'm not sure if she completely believed us, but this was when we were kids. I'm 23 years old now, and this story sticks out as the only and craziest paranormal experience I have ever had. 3 years ago, I went to Gettysburg with my family. I've been interested in the paranormal since I was small, always drawn to it, seeing and hearing things often. When I left for college, things started happening to my sister, and we realized that she was clairvoyant, and I myself am sensitive. My dad decided he wanted to test this, so he signed the family up for a ghost tour at an old Civil War field hospital that was turned into a home, then an inn, and finally a landmark. We found out that after many bodies had been thrown from the kitchen to an area besides a building, a woman had ended her life after the government lied about the whereabouts of her fiancé during World War II. There was simply so much death. Upon going up to the second floor, I couldn't breathe. I had a panic attack and no warning. I should have left them, but I went on. The others went to the attic. I followed, and later my sister said that she could have heard a noose tightening. My parents and I saw shadows. We spoke to spirits. It was surreal. They told the men to get out of the bathroom, perhaps because the ladies needed privacy even in death. Things happened. There was so much activity and I felt watched. We ended up in what used to be a prison for Confederate soldiers. They liked underage women. My sister had been about 16. Her hair was played with, she was scratched, and 3 lines on the back appeared. I felt wrong. We left and I was angry. We had 2 more days or so in Gettysburg, and I think I was so wrong that I couldn't get all of these negative thoughts out my head. I had nightmares. Everything people did annoyed me, and I was inconceivably angry. As soon as we crossed state lines, did I feel that I could breathe again. Later I was researching about demonic oppression, a step down from possession. It leaves the victim angry, depressed, suicidal and violent, suffering from night terrors. But nothing touched me. No. Later I was researching, and although I'm not sure what it was, I don't think it was demonic oppression. It was just oppression by some pissed off spirits. I'm sensitive, so vulnerable, especially going into places that are so packed with energy. I was essentially going in there with a target on my back. My depression, my eating disorders, my deteriorating mental state as a whole added to the fact that I had secretly stopped taking my medication, also added to the fact that I was feeling insane amounts of jealousy towards my little sister, as my father only seemed to be concerned with her powers, even though I had been doing it for a lot longer. And all of this culminated in a large hole in my defenses. Trying to act big and mighty in the face of something you thought you knew about, but really had no experience in dealing with, is a surefire way to get attacked. It's rarely demons doing the attacking. If it was, well, you'd know about it. I'd like to think that I've grown in the last 6 years since everything's occurred. I found the universe exists in various shades of grey. There is neither good or evil, just lighter and darker varieties. When I was 15, I was completely incorrigible and hung out with some of the not-so-great people. My main friend group hangout was at this house that we dubbed our house. Our house was technically a foreclosed property that had been previously owned by one of my friend's parents. The parents had moved out and left their 2 adult children, who were the siblings of my friend my age, living at the house. Every single day after school, my friends and I would meet up with the older siblings at our house and get absolutely hammered. Around 4 p.m. everyone would show up with fifths and other things, and it was a constant party every night. Things were pretty out of control here. One night we were all very drunk, and I got into a fight with my boyfriend, and I decided I wanted to leave, but no one would drive me home, and the buses had stopped running. It was at least 1 a.m. and I lived 6 miles away, and this was an urban area that was sketchy to walk at night. But I was pissed and drunk, so I told everyone that I was leaving. I got 3/4 of the way home without incident. I hadn't seen a single car nor person, and while I was kind of scared, I was feeling more confident the closer I was to home. I was crossing the freeway overpass that glides down into the valley where my neighborhood is, when all of a sudden I heard a whirring noise and see lights coming from behind me. I look over my shoulder and see a bus coming up beside me. The destination marquee is blank, and the lights inside are dim. I turn away and keep walking, and as the bus gets closer it slows down and drives next to me. This goes on for maybe 30 seconds when I start to feel genuinely uncomfortable and glance up. The bus stops and the driver opens the door. He's not wearing uniform and I still remember him pretty clearly. 50-something, salt and pepper hair, medium length for a man, thick dark grey beard, copper wire rimmed glasses. He leans against the driver wheel and looks at me up and down. "You look really young," he says, and I, like an idiot, stutter that I'm 15, thinking like most 15-year-olds that 15 isn't young. He smiled really slow and said, "This is a dangerous area to be walking alone, and there are all types of men out there. Why don't I get you on the bus?" Now, I may have been drunk, I may have been 15, and I may have been deludedly self-confident, but I wasn't that stupid. Something just didn't feel right, you know? I told him no thanks and quickly started walking again. For a while, the bus behind me didn't move, and then I heard its brakes lift and it started creeping up behind me again. This time I'm over the bridge and walking down a sidewalk with apartment complexes on either side. The bus pulls up again and opens its doors while following me. The man again tells me it's not safe and asks me to get on the bus. I told him no, I'm really almost home, it's fine, and I start walking faster. He closes the doors but keeps the bus at pace with me, and I'm really starting to worry. Finally, I decide to just run, so I start running, and at first I put some distance between myself and the bus, but he's still behind me. I slow down when I feel far enough away and catch my breath, but I keep walking. Next thing I know, the bus starts gaining on me, honking its horn. I screamed and fell over, still super drunk and now very scared. I got up and scurried into the neighborhood at my side and hid behind one of the carports. I could see the road and the bus had stopped. Its doors opened and the man came to the door and looked out at both directions. He lingered there for a moment and then I heard him say, "Crap," and got back in his seat, closed the door and drove away. It took me another 30 minutes to get home, even though it was less than a mile at that point, because I took a convoluted way through the bushes, yards and apartment complexes, terrifying the bus was still cruising around, looking for me. I deliver pizza, and I'd been having a really busy night, non-stop back and forth without any time to even pause or take a leak. I'd been so busy that I wasn't even thinking about bathroom breaks, but we're also going through a bit of a heat wave in our area, so I'd been drinking copious amounts of water. All of a sudden, as I was driving to this particular delivery, the urge to go hit me, like it went from 0 to 60 in an instant. Thankfully, I was close to the customer, so I could get this one over with quickly, or so I thought. I pulled up to the house and it was in an area I'd delivered to before, so I could immediately see that something wasn't right. All the lights were off in the house, not even the glow of a television or anything. It was extra apparent because the street light closest to the door happened to be out of order. and on top of it all, the block was dead quiet. This is a big university area, and obviously there aren't many student renters in July, but there had to be at least one person because someone ordered a pizza. Maybe they just liked sitting in the dark, or they were out back in the yard. Whatever, I just didn't want to get out my car and knock on a quiet house in the middle of nowhere at 9:30 without first checking that I had the correct address and the customer was inside. It was scorching that night, even at sundown, and my car's AC is a joke, and the piping hot pizzas don't really help as such. So I have to try and open the car door as infrequently as possible to keep in any cool air. I called the number the customer provided, and the voice on the other side said, "Yeah?" I just tried to keep it concise. "Hey, it's your pizza out front. There doesn't appear to be anyone home." The customer replied, still gasping for air, "Yeah, I'm not home." I had to be so badly by that point that I was much less patient than I'd otherwise been with a customer right out the gate. "Well, then you're gonna have to terminate the order because I've arrived in the stated delivery window and you were supposed to pay in cash, so I don't know what to tell you. Plan ahead next time." I instantly regretted letting my bladder do the talking for me, as the voice on the other end came through more clearly as a young, bubbly, and very distraught girl who couldn't have been older than 20 or 25. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I was running down the street and I could barely hear you. I just switched you out of my AirPods. Is that better? Sorry, I completely lost track of time at work, but I knew you were coming and that's why I'm literally running home right now. Please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Seriously, please. 5 minutes, okay?" I know what it's like to be hungry and running late, and have no car, and not living near any restaurants. Plus, when I heard her voice, I began to remember more specifically having delivered to this place a few times before, and she'd always been perfectly nice. Now I felt bad for snapping. I tried to walk it back, while simultaneously look out my window for potential spots to pee. No, it's my bad. I'm letting the heat get to me. That's all. It's not your fault. No need to rush. I'll just see you when I get here." I hung up, and while surveying the streets, I started to think I was really out of luck. All the other houses had people in them, and they were close together. So were the clumps of trees or out-of-the-way patches of land or anything. Of course, I had just tossed my empty water bottle at the last delivery, because I'm an idiot. Finally, I decided it was an escalation to the point of an emergency, and the safest bet was to use a bush, the one in front of the woman's house. She wasn't home, the street light was out and no one would see me. The people who were home were inside, and my car was parked across the street. And we're a small shop that don't wear uniform, and if someone did see me, they'd have no way to connect me to my employer. Animals pee outside all the times, humans are animals. This is fine. I scurried over to the tallest bush. She didn't really have much of a yard, it was just more of a walkway lined with bushes and flowers that ran adjacent to her front door. The biggest cluster of bushes, the only one where I could be sure of that there would be no visible splatter on the side of a house, was about 4 feet from her door. I looked both ways, unzipped and let it fly. After the initial millisecond of relief, I noticed the sound was way off, more like pissing on something solid than something leafy. I started panicking, thinking I'd aimed wrong, but once I started I couldn't stop midstream. So I kept squinting in the darkness to see if maybe I was hitting a key rock or something, and could just move a few inches over. Instead, all of a sudden I heard a way more concerning noise. What the hell? And before I could turn around, assuming to be caught by a neighbor, a man came leaping out of the bushes. He blew by me, brushing my golden shower off him as he did. He spit pretty much emphatically on the ground, so I think I might have beamed him right in the face. I didn't see where he went after a few paces, though this next part is kind of a blur. I do think I remember hearing a car screeching out a bit further away after a minute. I'd gotten some night vision by that point, so I was able to make out his height, build and outfit, but only the most general details of each. I was in such shock that I didn't even put my thing away. I just stood there trying to figure out what had happened. The reality was so terrifying that in my mind, I refused to accept it, and impulsively searched for a reasonable explanation that could make everything okay. Could these bushes lead to some backyard area that just looked like they were against the house? Could they have been obscuring an open window? My inner voice was desperately screaming, "Brah, that man was in a hoodie. In 90-degree weather. That was a bad man, you're in a bad situation." But the very idea that I was within inches of a guy who would be hiding in a bush at all, let alone in front of a young woman's house at night, just wasn't something I was ready to grapple with yet. I was coping by not coping. My fight or flight response totally failed me at that point because my dumb ass did the absolute last thing I should have done. I approached the bushes and tried to validate, there must be a good reason this man in a hoodie must be behind these bushes in the middle of the night theory. So I walked over to the side, turned on my phone flashlight and tried to peer around the line of shrubbery. Pro tip: as scary as things may be in the dark, seeing them with a single beam of your flashlight can sometimes make it worse. That's when I saw the bag. There was a tattered drawstring bag sitting behind the bushes, slightly splashed with pee. But I was in such a moronic daze from shock that I groped around for it, thinking, see, this is it. This'll explain why he was back here. I examined it. Once I maneuvered it over and pulled it open, I saw a sharp knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. The delusion officially broke at that point, and all the adrenaline, endorphins, and self-preservation instincts that had been suppressed kicked in 10 times over. I became whatever the opposite of dazed is, more laser-focused than I have ever been in my entire life, with one singular goal: get back to my car. I dropped the bag, booked it across the street, got in my car and slammed on the pedal before the door was all the way closed. I went as fast as I could until I hit a red sign, then I pulled over to the side and realized I couldn't be driving in the condition I was in. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour drugstore and took a deep breath. I was finally calm and coherent enough to zip up and formulate a plan of action. Who do I call first, the police or the girl whose house that was? I thought about it, for what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. Okay, I'm in a locked car with my engine running. If trouble starts, I can drive away. I know something is up. She might not. She needs to know not to keep walking in that direction. But as I was dialing her number, it occurred to me, what if there was no girl? I thought I remembered delivering to that house before, but what if I was wrong? What if the girl on the phone was just a decoy to get me there to rob me, or worse? Every pizza guy on the planet has seen the Evil Genius documentary by now. So I thought, she called me all out of breath. She wasn't home. The whole thing was off. I can't risk it. I'll call the cops. I called 911. The operator was very helpful in calming me down, because I was a complete wreck at this point. He kept assuring me that someone would be there soon. I kept telling them they had to be there before the girl did, but I was trying to express 3 thoughts at once and really damaging my own credibility. It came out more as, you've got to save this girl because he wasn't after me, I was just delivering a pizza. Unless they were after me, in which case there might not be a girl. But I talked to one on the phone, so then you should find the girl because they used her to lure me there. But if she's real, she doesn't know about the guy who is also real, and there could be more guys if there actually is a girl. And you know what? Even if there isn't a girl, there might not be more guys. I only checked part of the bushes, so I don't actually know. But, well, we'll know the guy is the one I saw because I peed all over him. You know, I didn't mean to. This was back when I thought the girl was real, but not home. But she might be real. So, you know, yeah. Please find her. Finally, they basically asked me to stop talking and stay on the line. But that was when I saw an incoming call from the customer. I couldn't answer it without disrupting my 911 call, so I ignored it. But then she sent me a text like, hey, I'm here, I don't see you. I told 911 she was there, and they said the officers were only minutes away, but who knows how long that meant, especially after I'd given such a scattered amount of information about the events in my panic. I just felt overwhelmed with guilt, but my rational mind said the odds of her being a decoy girl for some large scam targeting pizza guys were low, and the odds of her being the intended victim of a predator were high. So I put my 911 call on mute, where I can hear them but they can't hear me, and turned back, heart absolutely pounding out of my chest, compulsively muttering, shit, the entire way. Then I took 911 off mute, told them I had returned to look for the girl, and they weren't happy about that, but I saw her meandering past the parked cars in the street looking to see if one were mine, and I waved her down, flashing my brights. She bounced over to the window of my car, all happy-go-lucky, and I figured that was a good sign she wasn't in on it or whatever. But I was just so scared to be back in the general area and to not know what had just happened or what was gonna happen. I kept whispering, get in, and she was like, get in, huh? Oh, you want me to get the pizza from the back? I didn't want to make the same mistake with her that I had made with 911. So instead of telling her the whole story, I stuck to the bare facts. There was a man in your bushes. I'm on the phone with the police. I don't know where he is right now. Please get in the car and lock the doors. I was barely able to get the whole sentence out, and I was shaking like I had just downed 10 cups of black coffee. I held up my phone with 911 on the call screen to verify it for her. I thought that was why she got in the car with no further explanation, but it turns out that it wasn't entirely it. You're still here? Is she with you? Are you safe? Is anyone there? 911 kept checking in, not knowing who the third party was I was talking to. I reassured them, and we drove more cautiously this time to a location 911 instructed us to wait at to speak with a police officer as they cleared the area. I didn't actually have to do much after that. The police came pretty soon after a police car met us, and I gave a statement telling them everything I observed, and she went to go speak with more officers in detail than they needed me for. It turns out the reason she got right into the strange pizza guy's car without probing any deeper into my story was because she knew who the man was right away from the description. She had an abusive ex-boyfriend who was apparently psychotic enough that he immediately came to mind from hearing, "There's a guy in your bushes." She later called us to thank me and insisting on leaving a huge tip. I wasn't there when the call came in, so the kid who answered it didn't know to refuse to accept the money, but the manager already promised the next time we see her, we can load her up with enough 1 free pie cards to last a lifetime. Easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me on the job or off. I didn't get the chance to tell the story much because I try avoid sharing it with anyone who could possibly know the girl or know of the event. But I'm still not the same since. Even though I know he didn't have anything to do with me directly, this truly shook me to my core. So man in the bushes, let's not meet again. In 1979, when my mother was 15, a large group of my extended family were gathered in my grandmother's house in rural Iowa, where most of them live. They were there to discuss what was to be done with my recently deceased great-grandmother's house. You see, my great-grandmother had hated the house, and so in the final 6 months of her life, had built another house on the same plot of land, which I guess wasn't in accordance with state zoning laws. As any logical thinker would do, they decided to ask my great-grandmother herself, Ouija board in hand. The female members in the family walk out into the night to do their seance at her house, which was just down the dirt road from where they were. The house was built in the mid-19th century, had 6 bedrooms, was huge, and from what I can gather, didn't have any electricity, so they brought candles to light the space. About half the women in attendance were believers, with the others being skeptics, which led to some frustration with them asking questions on the Ouija board. However, sometime in the night, the energy of the house totally changed. One of my aunts asked if Margaret was there, but got no response from the board. Instead, a piece of tinsel on the doorway began to swing like a pendulum. My mum's youngest brother had just celebrated his birthday there a few weeks earlier, and the decorations were still up. It would be easy to say that the wind or atmospheric pressure could have accounted for this. However, keep in mind it was in a large house, and the rooms surrounding the central living room acted as a wind block. It is also worthwhile to point out that the candles at no point flickered nor went out. The movement continued with every question, back and forth like a pendulum. Finally, someone asks what was going to be done with the house, and the tinsel stopped moving altogether, and began to violently move in the opposite direction. The tinsel stopped responding after the question, so they moved back to the Ouija board, and no sooner had they done it did it spell out a very simple 6-letter message: burn it. They hauled ass back home, called the volunteer fire department, and did just that. When I was younger, the show Ghost Hunters was a new thing. Me and my friend used to hang around the local ice rink in Flagstaff, Arizona, and call out spirits for fun. The first night was something I'll never forget. That night, we saw a soda can get lifted and suspended in the air for a second, then drop. There's a shed next to the ice rink with a garage door, and there was a banging on the door and the lights came on inside. The only way to get in was the side door or the garage door, and neither had been opened. We started telling some other people about it. Next thing you know, people would come around the woods, Buffalo Park, next to the ice rink to call out spirits. We've seen full-body apparitions with red eyes. 3 people saw a little girl turn into a wolf and run off into pitch darkness at the same time. We've had several people with us when we saw yellow darting eyes and had a drum approach us at the very end, and it was like someone banged a drum in front of us and everyone ran in fear. Some wild stuff. Hard to get others to believe my story, so I hardly tell them. And years later I went through a religious phase and became Christian after straightening my life out. While praying in my living room, my bedroom was tossed around. I heard my name being called out by what sounded like a chorus, and I had a demonic hiss in my ear, and I thought I could feel the breath of whatever it was after I prayed for God to help me with this strange encounter. It stopped after that, and didn't resume until another 2 years later. I was with my girlfriend at the time, asleep in my room, when I woke up laying on my side, and I saw what looked like black stripes of cloth that had a smoky texture to them above my girlfriend. Half awake, I reached over to hear and shook her. Then I rolled over to see what looked like the Grim Reaper on my ceiling. It was like a hooded figure, pitch black, smoky texture, but you could see the outline of its body, like its arms, head and torso. Its robes were moving like they were alive. It was the hardest thing to explain, but I felt like every part of this being was alive, like some sort of energy you could sense. It leaned down like it was trying to get a better look of me, and I lost it. My body automatically started to scream on its own, louder than I had ever done before. The feeling of fear I felt that day was the most surreal thing I could ever explain. It was so horrific and dreadful, the feeling. My girlfriend woke up amongst the screams and she saw it as well and shut down, crying under her blanket, while I shouted at it to go away. It was like my brain knew what to do, but my body went into action yelling, and I just watched, and I ended up actually passing out from the fear. The passing out was unusual. I've been on a plane that had an engine failure and almost crashed into trees, and the fear I felt from that, thinking I was certainly going to pass from this, was not even close to the fear that that thing gave me. It was like my soul was afraid of it, not just my body, my mind. After that encounter, we had a door pop open on its own after waking up at 3 a.m. And that was the end of it for a long time. Fast forward to now, I live in an apartment with my daughter and her mother. We've not had much unusual stuff happen since we've been together. The only strange thing we've had is we both wake up at 1:20 a.m. and when my girlfriend was pregnant and her waters broke minutes after. But that I think is just a coincidence. But the other night I woke up and saw a dark figure rising out of the space between our closet and doorway. Thinking I was just half awake and still dreaming, I shrugged it off as that, just a dream. Then the following day, my girlfriend and me are home, and we start hearing serious banging on the bathroom door while in the living room watching TV. I rush to see why my girlfriend is making so much noise, and we meet in the hallway. She was frustrated, asking why I would scare her like that, and told her I had just gotten up to see what the noise was, and she gave me a frightened look and told me she didn't believe me, and we got into a short argument about it. The next night I'm awake in bed next to her, and we're both on our phones when we hear what sounds like someone going through our kitchen drawers. The sound of silverware rustling around and the wood drawers sliding open was enough to make me get up and grab my Mossberg and my girlfriend to phone the police. I turn on my tack light and investigate the potential intruders. When I hit the kitchen, it's clear that the kitchen drawers are open, which is strange. I switch on the light, and the living room light is on, but there's nothing. I check my daughter's playroom and the bathroom, and it's all clear. I realize no windows have been opened, the front door is locked and not messed with, and I tell my girlfriend to inform the dispatcher there was no break-in. They tell her they still want to send an officer to follow out, but we decline and let the woman on the phone know we'll call if need be. We make sure the house is clear one final time, talk about what happened and go to sleep. Just this morning I wake up with my girlfriend, and we start our day as usual by heading up to the kitchen to get our daughter's breakfast started. But now everything is open. Drawers, cabinets, nothing's thrown out, nothing is taken nor destroyed. But we both look at each other. We know something isn't right, and we try and see what we can do. My girlfriend found a shop that sells crystals and all the other kinds of stuff, and we get something called Hollywood and candles. We're told to burn the candles while burning the Hollywood, and say a prayer while walking into the room with the burning Hollywood. As far as this moment goes, I haven't seen or heard anything, but I'm 100% certain something did attach itself to me at some point. All I'm hoping is this is the end, and I've gotten rid of it. On my first summer back home from freshman year of college, I picked up a part-time job delivering pizzas in a town around 30 minutes away from where I lived. The area is rural Georgia, and is known for having places that are in the middle of nowhere, and the pizza place's whole shtick was that it delivered to even the most remote areas imaginable within the town limits. I could fill books with the weird experiences that summer, from the calls that came from long-abandoned warehouses to the dog that got excited about the pizza in my hand and accidentally shredded my pants with her claws, but one will always stand out in my mind as the creepiest. It was getting fairly late, 10:30ish, so I was confident at the time that I would be sent on no further calls before closing at 11. However, someone barely managed to miss the cutoff time, and our clerk accepted their order since they were so close, and I was given the address and a single box of hot dough and sent on my merry little way. The first red flag was the driveway, or rather the lack thereof. There was a mailbox, but no actual driveway, not even gravel. It was just grass and a barely distinguishable trodden pathway that resembled more of a service trail than it did something frequently used. I bumped along, wondering if I was even en route to the place, when I saw a slightly above average sized house looming over the horizon, horribly dilapidated and completely surrounded by overgrown woods. I estimated that the rest of the driveway led and ended up parking up in a grassy patch that could have been the walkway, just as easily as it could have been the front yard. Headlights aimed towards the porch as per company policy. I walked up to the door, but I believe that calling it a door is generous. It was a door frame all right, but the door itself was a large slab of wood propped haphazardly against the side of the house, barely covering the entrance. This was red flag number 2. The third and fourth were also around the door. This included an A4 sheet of printed paper with just the words "around back" scribbled in all caps, which was hanging just below the place where someone had self-engraved the door with the title of Mason Family Ranch. Typically, I would never go around the back of a house, especially a shady unlit house, and especially at night. However, it was my last drop of the day and I was ready to get it over with and be on my way home. Against my better judgment, I trapezed around the back of the house. The door back here was an actual door, but it was covered in both cobwebs and fresh spider webs. Clearly this was a door that had not been used in some time. I found the cleanest area available and knocked, counted to 45 and knocked again. There were no lights on in the house and I could hear no movement. I knocked and counted again, and repeated the sequence 3 times, and I was finally creeped out enough to return to my car. As I turned, I finally heard a voice coming from inside the house, clearly agitated, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I tried to knock once more, and as I was counting, I heard something in the wood behind me. It started out as just movement deep in the trees, but soon enough I could make out distinct footsteps coming directly towards me through the brush. As I'm standing there coming to terms with my impending demise, I follow the direction of the noise to the edge of the woods, which is around 15 feet away from me. In the moonlight, I can clearly see the woman who stepped out. She was relatively old, maybe in her 60s, with long blonde grey hair, which tangled and matted and hung down past her hips. She was in what looked like a nightgown originally, but at the time it was dingy and close to a beige-brownish colour. She was barefoot, and her feet were covered in what appeared to be dirt and blood, due to the fact that she had just sprinted through the prickly wood where there was no trail to be seen. I never learnt her name, but I still affectionately refer to her as Red Flag Number 5. She stopped short of when she saw me and started to shake her head. No, eyes wide. I stood there like a terrified deer in the most messed up headlight situation ever, and she took a few more steps towards me, reaching out to me, finger pointed. Her voice came out way stronger than mine would at the time when she spoke. You know how southern people can either sound like loving grandmas or backwoods murderers? Well, she sounded like the latter when she drawled. Oh, no. No, honey. You get on. You get out of here. I wish I could say I listened. I ran, I left, but I was so in shock at how the events were playing out that my own self-preservation was put on the back burner while I tried to figure out what just in the Kentucky Fried Chicken was happening. She seemed to realize that I was not moving. Even if I could, my mouth wasn't moving to ask her what was happening, or even what to do with the pizza in my hand. She looked at me like she could have smacked the hell out of me right then and there and proceeded to deliver red flag number 6 through 12. Darling, did you hear me? Or are you deaf or dumb? Young girls like you come out here and then they don't get to leave. So I finally quit being the scaredy cat in a horror movie when I realized that this was not funny. I was about 5'3", 116 pounds, and potentially being targeted, so I dropped the pizza, which had serious serial killer toppings by the way, and started running back to my car, which I had stupidly left on and unlocked, as was usual for most of my deliveries. As I neared the car, I heard a slam from behind me and I looked over my shoulder to see the wooden door had just been pushed over and fallen onto the porch beneath it. As I was closing the car door, an older man was limping to the front steps, waving his arms like an airplane runway attendant and calling me all sorts of names, telling me to get out the car now. At a loss for what to do, I called out something muttery and shakily along the lines of, "Pizza's out back," and floored my dad's little 90s Lexus and somehow managed to avoid trees on the odd trail back to the main road, which was still 12 miles and several turns from any road that actually had a name, let alone printed lines. I reported it to my manager and he said he'd contact the police, but nothing ever came of it, that I'm aware of. Either way, that was the first time and hopefully last personal encounter I have with the self-proclaimed Manson family ranch. When I was a 17-year-old in high school, I was in my school music department's auditioned women's choir. It wasn't for another couple of years that I would realize I was a trans demi-boy, but that's besides the point. One day I rushed home to have dinner with my mum before going back to school. For context, I got home around 3:30, and I had to be back at school by 6. So I would usually take the bus that got me to school around 5:30. So that way I would have time to go to the bathroom, grab some water and relax for a few minutes before I walked into a rehearsal with several girls who were popular, snooty, and loved to mock me every chance they got, which is also besides the point. Except to say, it put me in a less than perfectly at ease kind of mental state for the night. There was a bus stop diagonally across from the intersection of my small 3-story apartment building that I would usually wait at to catch the bus to the station, where I would then pick up the bus to go to school. I had only been standing there for about a minute when this guy who looked to be in his mid-50s was spotted in my vision. I got a bit of a creepy vibe from him from the start, but tried to be polite, being the naive 17-year-old I was. Dave, that's what we'll call the creepy guy now, takes another step or two towards me and starts asking me personal questions like what my name was, my age, my school. You know, things that someone who is closer to retirement than they are high school should not be asking or saying to a minor, even one who's 17. He continued to try and talk to me until the bus arrived, while I gave him shorter and shorter responses to his questions and tried to make it clear that I wasn't interested in continuing the conversation any further. I got the bus, and to my disappointment, but certainly not surprised, he followed suit, sitting in the front-facing seat directly behind me. The entire way to the bus station, he kept whispering in my ear about how sexy I was, what great eyes I had. I tried to ignore him and put my earbuds in my ear. He pulled my earbud out of my left ear, the one closer to the window, and most likely out of the driver's view in the mirror. He leaned forward, got his mouth so close to my ear that I could feel his breath as he spoke. "You would look beautiful all stretched out and used on my bed. You hear that, but you could look for you." This is the only thing he said where I can remember an exact quote. Even now, a decade later, I can sometimes feel his breath on my ear. I just hope that one day I'll stop feeling that same sketched out, skin-is-crawling fear whenever I see anyone who looks even remotely like him. For years now, I've been interested in the paranormal. I would do investigations with friends for years and even helped out a paranormal group from time to time. But my best encounter was when I was in the military. I was stationed at one of the army bases in the States and wouldn't have lots to do on the weekends, so one day I was really bored and brought myself a Ouija board, which was a big mistake. But I was a skeptic and needed to know, so I would do it with friends mainly. And nothing major happened except we would have the mover go by quickly. Several times we got responses, but the red flag should have been there when we got the response from Zozo and Mama. But then I started seeing stuff. The first time was when we used it in the Center for Events and Volunteering. Nothing major happened, but then one night while volunteering I went to sit in the giant room for conferences just to think. The middle lights were on, and the front and back ones were off, and I was just sitting in the back. At some point this man suddenly walks from one side of the front of the room to the middle front. I was about to ask if he was there for volunteering, but then I realized that he came from where there was no door. Then it looked at me in the eyes, and there was a shine in it like an animal's eyes, and I just took off and ran. I went back in a little while later, but there was no one there. You would think I would stop using the board, right? No. I used it in my room with a friend one time, and afterwards one night while sleeping I opened my eyes and looked at a silhouette of a man standing at the far corner of my room. It then started walking towards me, and as I began shaking my head, it was gone. The next night I put a movie on in my portable DVD player and I slept. No encounter. After a while I turned my player off to sleep. That night I woke up again, when a young woman's figure was right near me, by my bed. She began to reach for me and I shook my head and she too was gone. The remaining nights in that barrack, I kept that thing playing. Before I left the military, a few friends and I used the board one last time in another hangout place that was said to be haunted. Nothing happened to us, but a friend who was also a volunteer in the hallway said that she heard 3 loud hissing sounds and 3 laughters in her ear. She never went back there. Since my experience, I haven't touched a Ouija board since, though it's still in the box of my room. Some part of me wants to throw it out, but I've heard stories of people burning it or throwing it out for it to return. Since then, I haven't had a true experience, but I do have that player playing every day while I sleep. For those of you wanting to play the Ouija board, do realize when you play it, you're going to be opening a door to something you don't know or can't possibly understand. I got lucky. This all happened at the same house, which was an 100-year-old farmhouse that was also a part of the Underground Railroad. We no longer live there. The house doesn't even stand there anymore. It's a very expensive neighborhood. My parents said that they were sitting on our couch and watching TV. The fireplace shutters opened and closed several times on their own. On another occasion, my mum was sitting in the same living room. Towards her front was a large wooden deck that had a fireplace in the center and two large windows on either side. To the right was a concrete porch that ran the length of the side of the house. It had a door off to the side and had several large windows on it as well. To her back was a bedroom that us kids shared in the winter because it was easier to heat half the house. To her left was the blue room. The whole thing was blue, but it was just a central room where our computer happened to be and had access to the basement. Anyway, on the wooden deck, my mum saw a black figure that was as tall as a bear but too thin to be human. She said that it looked at her and had a feeling it was watching her. It wasn't completely dark outside, but it was on its way. The figure then started doing laps around the house. It would pass the window in front of her every few seconds. This was a 2,500-ish square foot farmhouse. It was incredibly fast. We had a small family farm of chicken, goats, pigs, quail, turkeys and ducks. Nothing big, but we had 30 chickens at the time. Living that far out in the country, we always set up traps by the coop to catch possums and raccoons, anything that ate chickens. But we go outside one day to see a pile of feathers throughout the yard and around the coop. Every single pile had a head on top of it, 30-ish piles, and that many heads. No puddles of blood, no insides anywhere, just piles of feathers and heads. Shortly after this, my dad would go out at night with a shotgun to see if he could find anything. We had gotten more chickens and nothing unusual had set the traps. My dad was a manly man, not scared of anything. I've seen him move a tree by himself out of the road that 4 grown men weren't able to do together. He's tough. So he goes out like he usually does. Our chicken coop sits at about 50 feet-ish in front of the garage. It was really just a 1,000 square foot ranch outbuilding. We just called it the garage. So we hear 5 blasts or so from the shotgun, and very shortly after, my dad comes through the front door with tears running down his face. He is visibly shaking, and after he calms down a bit, he explains that while in front of the garage he heard a real, guttering growl coming from the tree line right behind and above the garage. He said it wasn't like anything he'd ever heard in his life, and he was an avid hunter, growing up hunting. He's even heard and probably eaten just about any animal that Indiana has to offer. He said it was low and demonic, and that he could just feel it was evil. He immediately unloaded the shotgun and ran into the house. The next story I don't like to talk about much, but it's relevant. I would hear voices in that house. One night I woke my parents up crying to let them know that the devil wanted my soul and wouldn't stop trying to get me until I gave it to him. I don't remember much about it, because this was about 5th grade. I'm 31 now, and since I've been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, I can see where it might have just been my anxiety, but I definitely remember sitting on the living room floor sobbing at 3 a.m, just begging for the voices to stop. I haven't had anything else at all similar to this event happen. My parents found a tunnel in our basement that we assumed was part of the Underground Railroad. My cousin was over at the time and asked if he could explore it. It was covered up, about shoulder height to an adult, and an adult could crawl through, with not a whole lot of extra room. We had a flashlight, and were gone for about half hour. While we were starting to get very worried when we could see the light again, he came back and said that there had not been an end in sight, but he was getting nervous having crawled so far. He was probably about 16-ish. We always had dogs and would just find our dogs in front of our house. Passed away, with no wounds or prior symptoms, simply gone. Sometimes 3 at a time. My dad on the way home from work saw a pile of dead dogs in a field by our house, probably about 5 feet tall. We don't even know how to start to explain that. On another occasion, my 2 brothers and I were in the house and things started to fall off the walls. We ran outside into the field in front of our house and looked across the street to the other cornfield. There were hundreds of deer running. It filled the field for several minutes. Enough disruption caused by them running made it feel like it was a small earthquake. We found out after we moved that there was also a practicing coven that met not far from our house. We heard that a lot of dead animal remains have been found as well. So on to the next creepy thing. A decent amount of years later, I went with my sister to Chicago. Her fiancé had graduated boot camp and was now going to A school. I'm not a military man, so I'm not sure if any of this sounds incorrect. They do a ceremony for family with their group flags and such. They hang out for a bit and then leave for A school. On their way home, I was asleep in the car and my sister had gotten lost. I shot up out of sleeping and told my sister to pull the car over. She did and I told her to turn. She asked what was wrong, and I said that I woke up because we were by our old house and that I could feel it. She made a turn, and we passed the front gates of a cemetery that was right by the house. Had she kept going in that direction, we would have passed right by it. What was at the start of all this was a dream that my sister had. I didn't find out about the dream until I was in high school. Anyway, surrounding the end of the property there was a tree line that separated where the coven met and our house. My sister said that in her dream there were monsters tearing down the tree line, and that she knew that if they tore it down, they'd be coming for me. Only me. Not my sister nor any of the other people in my family. Well, not long after, in preparation of turning the property into a subdivision, they tore down the tree line. All of the stuff happened. My parents decided one day that we were moving, as we rented, and we had a house purchased on contract, and we were completely moved out in 2 weeks' time. I remembered this other story. This is definitely the event that is the foggiest in my memory. I was in Boy Scouts, and it was the time of the year for popcorn. I sold enough popcorn to be one of the top in the state. That's what my parents told me, at least. I just knocked on doors and pushed the popcorn. My parents had loaded up the van with all the popcorn that we were going to deliver the following morning. It was an old brown/tan Astro van, the ones with the weird curtains in the window. This was completely stuffed with popcorn. We all go to sleep and I remember being outside with my family looking at our van on fire. The fire department came and everything. The thing burnt completely. Well, my dad takes the picture with him to show people because of the crazy story. My dad is showing a guy the picture and the dude asks him if he sees the face. My dad looks at the picture and sees the face. To kind of summarize this, because I don't want to make up details that I don't remember, things started to appear in the picture, like in the flames. It started with a face that turned into a demonic-looking Grim Reaper figure, the scythe and all. Then people started to notice more things as my dad showed it to more people. My dad would hand the picture and ask what they saw. Everyone saw it. Then people started noticing the Reaper figure was holding a chain that was attached to a torn-apart dog, and finally a burning cross behind it. As soon as people started seeing that, my dad stuffed the picture in a Bible. It was one of the Bibles with a built-in zipper, and he didn't tell any of us about it until after we moved. He pulls out the Bible while we're moving and the picture's gone. If I remember right, he was freaked the hell out. I remember my dad always handing the picture to people and then being all creeped out. I remember seeing the fire. I saw the picture once right after it had been taken, and I remember playing on the burnt-up van. It was the late 90s and we were kids. The rest of it is what my parents have talked about. My dad was a server at some restaurant for about 25 years, so he showed it to a ton of people. This isn't just a few buddies. He literally started handing it to his customers. Everyone saw it and started to see more. All my life, I've been told I'm special and that I have abilities, and to trust my intuition. I always have, and there have been many times where I've encountered supernatural entities. As a toddler, when I would be at my grandparents', I'd spend hours in my grandparents' bedroom in the corner, looking at the window and talking to my deceased great-grandfather Jack. I don't recall what I would talk to him about, but this did scare my family quite a bit, as I knew things from my conversations with him about my family that happened before I was born. This went on for years every time I was at my grandparents' house. When I was around 10, I got up in the middle of the night near Christmas Eve to go to the restroom, and halfway there something caught my eye. I saw the black silhouette of something, or someone, hiding behind the archway. I could see a big beard, and it was taking deep breaths, slowly. I thought it was my father and said, "Nice try, I see you." But there was no response, just the slow, deep and constant breathing from this dark figure with a large beard. I started to feel an overwhelming sense of dread that made me feel sick, and I dropped to my knees. Whatever this thing was, it looked malicious, and the energy from it was affecting me physically. I looked back up to confront it, but it was gone. It had vanished, but I was still very physically sick for the next few hours, as its residual energy remained. Sometime later, when I'm 18, I'm in my bedroom, AC off, windows closed. It was a still night, and there was no drafts in my room. I was browsing the internet on my iBook, and all of a sudden I had this pain in my head. It felt as if I'd been hit by something at the back of my head, and started to make me feel the same type of dread that I felt when I saw and felt the entity when I was 10, and also made me feel like I was being watched. I began to look around my room to see if there was anything in it. I couldn't see anything like I did when I was 10, but I could feel it. The level of dread I felt was no way near as intense as when I was 10, and it didn't make me feel weak and physically sick, but it did make me feel ill. I then saw the dream catcher hanging over my window start to move. It moved slowly and gently at first, but then it became faster and more violent. It built up speed, moving back and forth over a few minutes, until it was being so violently moved that it ripped off the wall above the window and flew across the room. After this, the feeling quickly lifted, and I assumed the entity had left. In my early 20s, I encountered the most malicious entity I'd ever felt. I'd moved into a new house, freshly built, and at first, things would be out of place or moved, and I just thought it was me, as I've always been a scatterbrain. The first time I saw it, I was in my ensuite, and I got the most intense chill down my spine, and every single hair on my body stood on end. I didn't feel dread this time. I felt what I can only call pure hatred and rage. There aren't quite words to describe it, but that's as close as I can put into words. That's when I saw it, in the ensuite mirror, that just outside the door there was the darkest silhouette I've ever seen. It was darker than the darkest night, and it wasn't in an unlit hall. All the lights were on, but it was as if it was absorbing all the light coming near it. I could also see black, tiny orbs floating around it. Due to the rage and fear I was feeling from it, I wasn't scared or sick. I was furious, screaming at it. "What do you want? What are you?" I picked up a bottle of aftershave and threw it at the entity. It went through it and shattered the mirror behind it as it faded away. Not instantly disappearing in the blink of an eye like my previous experience. No. It just slowly dissipated into nothing. Over the next 2 years, I continued to randomly see this entity. There'd be months between sightings at least. I'd always see it in only 2 areas of the house, the kitchen and the ensuite. I'd always feel these feelings of hatred and rage every time, and the chills down my spine would become more intense. I could feel this thing wanting me dead. I tried to communicate with it, but it never would respond or show any sign of wanting to communicate. I'm a pagan, so I tried some rituals to no avail, and as a last resort, I decided to try a spirit board. I performed the protection circle ritual and wore protective crystals and started at 3 a.m. I lit 6 candles in a circle around me and asked for any spirits with me to speak up through the spirit board. And the planchette started to move. W-E-C-U. The chill returned and all my hair stood on end. After I read that, I was terrified. I looked up and was in shock and couldn't move a muscle. It wasn't just the one pure black entity. There were 6 of them, side by side watching me. I opened my mouth to ask what they wanted, but before I could make any words out, the candles blew out, and the salt protection circle was blown away in a gust of air, breaking it, and I was violently pulled by my feet and dragged out the circle while screaming in terror. The entities weren't touching me, they were watching me. Nothing visible was pulling me. I was dragged out my lounge room and towards the garage, and as I was pulled through the garage internal door, I smacked my head on the concrete floor and passed out. When I came to, my head was pounding and my head was bleeding severely. I remember what happened and my flight response kicked in, and I got up and ran as fast as I could to the front door. I ripped the door open and got into the car that was on the street and started it before I put it in gear. I looked back, and the figures were watching me from the front bedroom window. I put the car in gear and floored it. I never returned, and had movers move everything to a new home. The entities didn't follow. There is a spirit in my new home though, but I believe it's my great-grandfather, and every now and then I smell the strongest cigarette smoke, and I feel loved. I believe he's watching over me in my new house. And I've never experienced anything that's so malicious and plain evil like I did with those 6 entities. And I knew they wanted me gone. But why? I'll never know. Not that I wish to know. When I was in 8th grade, I used to live with my mother in a camper which sat in my grandmother's backyard. The living situation was tough, and when you have 2 people and a dog living in a 50-square-foot space, things can get annoying. The camper was a stone's throw away from my grandmother's trailer, and late one night, I woke up having serious stomach trouble. Obviously, since there was no working toilet in the camper, I had to run up to Mama Linda's to use the bathroom. Crucial and funny fact. I sleep with no clothes on, and I don't use a bathroom with clothes on either. Weird, I know. But anyway, I got out of bed, put on some shorts, and grabbed my shirt, because I was in a hurry. When I opened the back door of the trailer, I had my shirt halfway in case I ran into Grandma. Sure enough, there she stood in the middle of the hallway. She had cancer at the time and had to go to the bathroom many times during the night. She told me to go ahead, and that she would wait on me. So I bolted in. When I got there, I dropped all my clothes next to the toilet and did my thing. Here's where things get a little crazy. When I was done, I looked over to find my clothes, and yet there were none there. Only my undergarments remained. Thinking this was crazy, I went back into the hall and asked my grandma, "When I came into the house, I was putting on a shirt, right?" "Yes," she said. "Where are they?" I told her I had no idea, so I left out the back door and went back to the camper. On my bed laid my shorts and shirt, neatly folded. I was terrified because I remember having them on when I got to Mima's house, and she remembered me fiddling with my shirt. Not to forget this was in the wee hours of the morning, and through 3 closed doors. How on earth did my clothes weasel themselves from next to me through 3 walls without me even knowing? This happened a few months ago. I'm 18 and I'm hanging out with my friends that night, so I had to take the bus to return home. It was around 11 p.m, and I was alone at the bus stop with another girl who was talking on the phone a few feet away, when this random guy sits next to me. He was at least 30 and starts speaking with me, and looked very creepy. He starts asking me where I got my tights and how he could get the same ones and that they really fitted me. I tried to be as nice as I could. Then he puts his hand on my thigh, and I get up immediately, and he told me he did it so he could feel if the tights were thick. What a lame excuse. I didn't want to start any trouble with him because he did look very creepy, so I told him it's fine and put my headphones on, but didn't sit down again though. I turned to look at him a few times because I could feel him staring at me. He was talking on the phone, but I couldn't hear what he was saying as he covered his mouth with both his hoodie in hand, not taking his eyes off me for a second. I got really scared at this point. I weighed my options and realized that I didn't have a choice to not take this bus home. The only other way was walking, and I'd have to go through some really dark alleys to get there. And what if he followed? There's no way a small girl like me could take him down, especially if he was planning on bringing any company. So I did what I thought was safer. I made my phone as traceable as I could by opening Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Not sure how, but it made me feel safer. Then I texted my mum and told her about the situation. She then tried to call me, but I didn't want him to notice that I was feeling scared in case he attacked me or something. So I told her to text me during the entire ride home. He got off the bus when I did with some other guy that had gotten in a few stops before. I'm not a good runner, but this time I ran as fast as I could and faster than I'd ever run before. I didn't have keys with me that day, so I hid between my aunt's and my house, as I didn't want the risk of my mum not opening the door in time in case they were behind me. I heard their footsteps passing me, and I realized that when I ran, they ran after me, but not as fast so I could see them. Probably waiting until I slowed down, right? I don't know why they would do that, to be honest. After waiting for a few minutes in case they came back, I rang the doorbell and was greeted by my mum hugging me and crying from happiness. She tends to be a drama queen, but as I'm sure you've gathered by now, those guys had ill intention, and I'm sure if they'd have caught me, my fate would have been far, far worse than a simple scare. When I was in college, I delivered pizzas, and once stopped at a delivery and noticed that the neighbor's house was about to be on fire. I say about because the fence attached to the house was in flames, and it was up against the house, and the flames were licking the eaves. I ran up to the front door, rang the doorbell, knocked and yelled, but nothing. I called the fire department, then ran into the house next door, pulled off their hose and ran to the other side of the house on fire, attached it and started spraying. I had almost most of it out when the fire department arrived and they finished the job. As they were spraying it down, a 20-year-old girl comes out the house with her 13 and 14-year-old girl. Apparently, the 20-year-old one was babysitting the younger ones and was scared to open the door. Earlier that night, the 2 younger girls had broken up with their boyfriends and with the babysitter's help, set fire to pictures of their ex-boyfriends and threw them in the trash can outside. The trash can just happened to be up against the wooden fence that was up against the house. I delivered the pizza next door and went on with my shift. A week later, their parents stopped by the store looking for me and gave me a $50 gift card to the local mall to say thank you for saving their kids from a fiery inferno of death. And the babysitter got fired. This happened some years ago when I was 16. I'm in my early 20s now and live in Egypt. Our manner of transportation here includes what is called a microbus, which is like a minivan. There are 3 seats in the front and 3 in the back, as well as a driver's seat. I was coming back from my high school with my certificate, and my father told me prior to get some specific bread from a supermarket 20 minutes away. So I thought, why not? And went to get some more bread and toast for me at the market. It was Ramadan around noon, so I was fasting and thirsty, so I thought I might as well get a ride back home. I see the small microbus and wave and ask him if he's going the same way I was, and the driver said he was. As I opened the door, I saw the first red flag. There, seated in a very specific position, do I see some people. On the back seat there's a guy on the left, and the guy on the right is leaving a middle seat vacant. In the front there was one guy sitting on the left that leaves the middle seat, back seat, and middle seat. In the front row there's one guy sitting on the left. The second red flag is that if I remember correctly, they were trying to avoid looking at me, but very nonchalantly, almost like it was completely on purpose. The third red flag is when I greeted them. They replied all in sync, very curiously. My gut feeling at this point was telling me to run the hell away from there, but I thought I was just being a coward. It's noon and I was a kid, and didn't want to be judged or inconvenience the driver, so I took a deep breath and jumped in the back in the middle seat between the 2 strangers. The car took off and I started to get my money out to ask the driver how much it was going to be, when I noticed he had gone past the route he said he was going. It was at that moment I realized something was very wrong. The guy on the left drew a firearm and cocked it, when the one on the right retrieved a pocket knife and put it on my hip. I simply panicked, started freaking out, asked them not to hurt me, and got out everything I had, which was an old Nokia phone worth very little, and about 13 Egyptian pounds, which isn't much and can barely get you breakfast. The guy at the front nodded at me as I gave him the phone and asked him if I could have back the SIM card, which he did, and he gave the phone to the driver, who laughed at me saying like, "You lucky son of a." That's when things take a turn for the comedic. Not for me at the time though, because obviously there were 2 weapons next to me. When the guy on the left saw how little money I had, he gave it back to me. And when I asked the guy in front if I can have the bread, I have no idea why I asked, since my father would kill me when I returned home without it. When they made sure I had nothing else, they opened the door for me, and the guy with the firearm on my right told me to wait up and apologized for the screw-up. He asked where my wallet was, which I didn't carry, and I didn't have one, so I looked in my back pocket and couldn't find it, and told him the other guy took it, and he basically picked a fight with him for yelling something akin to, "Did you snatch the wallet for yourself, you son of a..." And when I finally left the vehicle, the guy with the firearm said that if I even looked at the vehicle, he would shoot me. Obviously I didn't. I walked the rest of the way home, shocked and scared as hell, but numb at the same time. When I got home, I cried and shouted my lungs out and blamed my father. For no obvious reason, I was just scared, and he basically got dressed and told me to come to the police department with him. I was too afraid to leave my home and I refused, and he went alone to report it. He later convinced me to go with him to look at possible suspect pictures, but I don't remember their faces, and I have no idea if their pictures were there or not. I was afraid for years to go near any form of public transport, let alone deal with strangers. But eventually, and with the help of my friends and family, I overcame it. I also learned to never choose another person's feelings over my gut feelings. I'd rather be wrong and look selfish than be put in a compromised position, all because I kept thinking of what could have gone wrong if I hadn't have come with that bread. I keep asking myself, what if I were a girl? What if they were not robbers, but more? About 2 years ago, I used to work part-time at a popular pizza chain as a delivery driver. I had a full-time job during the days, so the shift at the pizza place would be from 6 p.m. to midnight. I enjoyed the job for the fact that I made good money and it was easy, but I hated working at night because it was dangerous. One night, we got a call 30 minutes before closing for a delivery in the worst part of town. I was stuck taking the order since my manager sent the other driver home early because it was a slow night. I hurriedly headed out to deliver the pizza, and about 20 minutes later my GPS said I'd arrived. I couldn't read the house number as it was pitch dark and no one in the house had their porch light on. As safety, I called the customer to ask if they could turn on their light, but he didn't answer until the 6th ring. He tells me his house has 2 trash bins next to the curb and that the light is broken so he can't turn it on. I started walking through the front yard to the front door when I see a man staring at me through the window. I yell out hello, but get no reaction. He doesn't even move to open the door. I'm getting goosebumps now, and I decide to turn around and go back to my car. I call the customer again to get the pizza from my car, and he tells me in a slow, creepy voice to ignore his roommate. He said the door is unlocked if I could take the pieces to the basement because he rents the bottom floor. As I'm on the phone, I could make out the small light from the window. The man that was staring at me earlier was on the phone talking to me. I hung up and took off. By the time I got back to the restaurant, the phones were turned over. Any complaints would have to wait till the next day. I'm not delivering to any basements and I'm taking your pizza home for dinner. Let's not meet again. I am a 19-year-old female, measuring approximately 5'4", and I live in a relatively safe part of my city in Ontario, Canada. This happened last summer. You see, I usually use Uber Eats or a food delivery service akin to that when I want fast food at night, as I can't yet drive. It was summer, and I live about a 25-minute to 30-minute walk away from our downtown area, where there's the Wendy's and McDonald's, etc. It was still pretty light outside, and was going to be so for a while, so I figured I'd just walk to get some food and save some money and get exercise. My boyfriend, who lives half-hour away from me, and is quite overprotective of me, especially since I've had a bunch of creepy encounters before, was against my little outing, but I assured him it was light out, and I would be messaging him the whole way. I'm about 20 minutes into my walk, in a pretty open area with a field that leads into downtown, next to a usually busy road, but it was kind of empty and slow at the time. The long stretch of sidewalk I'm walking on has a chunk of apartments on the other side of the street that loops around from the top to the bottom of the stretch of sidewalk. I'm getting to the beginning of this long stretch before downtown when I hear something behind me and turn to see a guy, kind of sketchy looking, trailing behind me on a bike riding on the road next to the sidewalk I'm on. He smiles and says hi, so I smiled but said nothing and kept walking. I had one headphone in, but turned my music off once I noticed something else was near. After that little exchange, and an awkward few seconds of him still being behind me, he speeds up and bypasses me and goes down the road that leads only to my right. I've been texting my boyfriend this whole time, so I tell him about this strange little exchange, and he immediately tried to make some jokes that make me feel less weirded out, as I'm easily put on edge by people I don't know, especially males, as I've had a number of bad experiences and I'm quite small in stature. After texting and walking some more, I dropped the topic and heard a noise behind me, and it's the same dude. But this time, he starts riding slowly beside me as I walk. This is all purposeful. And from this point on, everything that happens I'm relaying to my boyfriend. The guy says hello again and asks why I'm out so late, as by this point the sun is setting. Now my guard is immediately up. I'm small, walking alone, and it's getting dark, so I wanted him away from me. Even though I live in Canada, the province/city where I live is dominated by the English language, and very few people can understand, let alone speak French. But lucky for me, my mum forced me into French immersion from kindergarten, and I've kept up with it all through school, so I can speak both English and French pretty well. I decided to just say a few words in French to make it seem like it was my only language. I've done this a few times when I needed to get a stranger off my back, but this time it backfired. After realizing I apparently didn't understand what he was saying, he rode off. But very soon after, I heard him behind me again. I figured he looped around the apartment again and got behind me quickly, so I turned to look at him to let him know I knew he was there. This is where my plan backfired. He rides up beside me again, saying something along the lines of, "So do you understand me?" And I just kept speaking a few words in French here and there, hoping he would get the message and just leave. I start to just stare straight ahead and move away from the road some more. This disgusting excuse of a person starts to tell me a lot of terrible and abhorrent and mainly gross sexual things he would love to do with me while riding alongside me. I'm kind of frozen, just walking there, texting my boyfriend everything that's going on and beg for him to call me. As soon as my phone rings, I pick it up and try and sound as normal and calm as possible, while my boyfriend is freaking out. After being on the phone a little while, I stop and turn around. I was holding in many tears and voice cracks until I knew the guy was gone. He didn't turn around to follow me more, he just rode off after, and I turned around and walked the other way. I waited, I was sure I was out of his sights before I booked it while sobbing on the phone to my boyfriend, who was also shaken up. I'm feeling helpless, as he was so far away. Eventually I calmed down, but it did shake me quite badly. And after an hour or so of calming me down and asking if I wanted him to come by, as it was a long drive and he had to work the next day. But I told my boyfriend not to, but that I appreciated the offer. He felt awful and ordered me the food so that I would feel a little better. Anyway, creepy douche who felt the need to make me scared and uncomfortable on your walk just because I was craving some fries and a shake, I hope you fall off your bike. But one thing I simply must try and get you to understand is just how creepy it is to be so vulnerable in such a situation, with no one to turn to, nowhere to go, and darkness enveloping you. It is incredibly uncomfortable, and I hope he never does it to anyone. I was 14 when this happened. My mum was going to work, and she told me to wait for the guy to deliver groceries. It's usually a middle-aged guy called John. Well, I've known him for years now. I just had to get the groceries on the table and put the meat in the fridge. Well, this time John's cousin came, and I immediately had some bad vibes. He came rarely and only when my mum was there, but I thought it was no big deal. As soon as he saw me and not my mother, even before saying hi, he goes, "Are you home alone?" I hesitated a bit, and then said that I wasn't and that my mum was cleaning the dishes. He then did a weird expression in his face like a grin. "Are you sure?" At this point I was creeped out. I told him to just give me the groceries, to which he responded, "I can bring these in, don't worry." And as he started moving inside, I was scared to say the least and tried to stop him. "Got a problem, dude?" he said, angered. "Yeah, I do. I never told you to come in." I picked up the groceries and shut the door. He looked furious, but I didn't give him time to reply. After that, I never saw him again. Apparently, the worst part is that all of John's cousins are dead. So I don't really know who that dude was, but I don't want to. I'm glad I didn't let him in. This story takes place in a cabin in Vermont. It was a small room with a lofted area for the bed, a wood stove for heat and no running water. Attached with a composting toilet pretty far away. Nestled into the mountainside on a dirt road, off another dirt road, both formerly logging trails. My girlfriend found the place on Craigslist and wanted to move into it together because, in lieu of rent, we could provide 8 hours of labor a week to the landlord. I like adventure and the wild setting, and I was nervous that if she went in without me, she would be in over her head. The backstory on the cabin is that it was built by a man with the initials DC in the mid-70s. He suffered from schizophrenia and lived in the cabin while renting out another on the property for income. Somewhere along the line, he had a couple in his rental property who couldn't pay the rent and wouldn't move out, and that upset him. While they were gone, he burnt their home, which he owned, to the ground. In the fallout, their relationship ended, and they drifted away. DC built another cabin, a shack really, 2 small rooms with a low ceiling, adjacent to the rubble, and moved in. I assume that was so that he could rent out his larger cabin, but no one I spoke to about it could confirm that. Most of the history comes from our landlord, who briefly knew DC, and a college friend of his who still lives on the mountain in a shack made of plastic and tarps with a propane cooking stove for heat. He is a lovely guy and a beautiful artist who doesn't like talking to strangers, but he and I connected over our love of nature and the pursuit of freedom. The shack still stands on the property, but the roof is full of holes and is terribly rotten. It is frankly questionable how a structure as unsound as it is stays up, but it does. The shack overlooks the cabin and can be seen looking out from the bathroom window and the southwest window in the main cabin. It was unearthly to see it in the moonlight. The story I'm about to share took place on November 18th of last year, roughly 2 weeks after my girlfriend and I moved in. Kaylee had some problems and still does. I loved her dearly, though at this point in time we were inseparable. The day starts normally. She went to work, I stayed home and gave the dog a bath. A statty stopped by looking for her. Second time she was out, and delivered a card. I texted her a photo and told her to get in touch without thinking, and that set her off. I had to go to work, so I sent her a message that I said I trusted her and would see her later. I went to work with the landlord, I mean old POS, one of the bad yogi variety, and left my phone in my coat. We were bucking logs and splitting wood that day, which is warm work as the old saying goes, so I tossed my coat on the side and didn't hear my phone ring. When we were done splitting wood, he needed me to help him drop off a car for his repair, as he needed my help because he has no friends and the place we were going to was some rando rustic shop because he thought he could make the guy work for extra cheap. On the way back, I finally take a look at my phone, and there's the one message you never ever want to see. The note that says you'll end your life. We get back to the mountain and I'm at a loss. My car has been sitting there since the day I brought it over because the battery is dead and it has no gas in it because I forgot my wallet the last time I drove it. And her car is a reliable one, and wherever she isn't answering her phone. I tried calling her relatives to no avail, so I mentioned the predicament to my landlord, and he cracks a joke that she's probably already deceased before covering up with a very hollow, "It's usually nothing." He says I can have a half gallon of gas from the can and he'll give me a jump, but that's it. I honestly didn't care because it was enough to get me moving and I was in no mood to be wasting energy. So I set out, jumper cables in the passenger seat, $3 in my pocket for gas, which was literally all I had at that point, because you don't work for rent if you're flush with cash, and I white-knuckled it to town, praying with my whole soul that she would be alright. I drove to all our usual spots with no luck, and went to the bar where her sister works in the hope of finding her. She wasn't working, so I gave the bartender my number and asked him to reach out to her, saying that it was urgent. Then I went to Kaylee's work, which was babysitting, and asked how she was when she left. Her employer told me she had left bitterly, swearing that she was going to end her life. But she hadn't done anything because she didn't think it was important. Just think about that for a moment. Then a glimmer of hope. Her sister has a heads up, a single text message of the letter S. But after roughly 5 hours up against it, we knew she was still breathing, and you can't imagine my relief. So I went home and waited, and kept texting her encouragement. Night fell, and I was in the cabin alone, waiting. I'm a little bit of a poet, and so I finally sent this poem. Sweet baby girl out on your own, who knows the way that will guide you back home? We love you, we miss you, our beating hearts have flown out from our chests to seek our missing one. She came home a half-hour later, staggered through the door and fell into my arms sobbing. She said that she had stopped 3 times on her way up to the mountain because she lacked the strength to return, but she said I had called her back. I asked her how she was, and she said that she felt heavy and cold, like she'd fallen down a dark hole. She said she couldn't find a way out, and that she had lost the light. I specifically remember her saying she felt like something was trying to swallow her and wouldn't let her go. Then she looked at me and said she thought something from the cabin or the mountain was attacking her through her Ouija board. At this point, I felt thoroughly up against it. Her Ouija board is over 100 years old, one of the original boards made from a single piece of wood. I had seen it once or twice, but didn't like it much because of my background. I'm Christian, and strongly believe in the existence of demons and spirits and the like. And depending on who you ask, a Ouija board is like a direct door to hell. Her board is stored in a closet under the cabin, reachable only by a steep, dirt path tucked in any one of a random assortment of boxes. The last time Kaylee had been down there, she very nearly fell on a pair of scissors. To put it bluntly, there were very bad vibes, and they were strong. So I told her I would deal with it if she agreed to follow my instructions until we were done. She was nearly dead on her feet and agreed. The first thing I did was to climb to the loft and get my crucifix. It was a gift to me from a man I met walking my dog, passed down to him from his German grandmother who had it blessed by a Catholic priest. I have another story about the crucifix, but that's not for today. I sit her on the couch and hand it to her with the order to hold it in front of her and to not say anything. My father is a pastor and my mother a devout, so I called them. I told my mother what the situation was, and she says, "You can't exorcise a board because it's inherently evil." To which I replied, "I know, but I can drive away anything coming through it and bind its power." I asked her to pray for my protection and success, and she said she would. I cleared my desk so I had a place to put the board on when I got back. I laid my Bible on it to be ready at hand and put my coat on and looked at the front door. I didn't want to go out. I can't tell you how much I did not want to leave. The board made me uncomfortable on a good day. Now I had to go find it in a closet in the dark by myself, with the full knowledge that it was harming my girlfriend. I put on the only headlamp we had, mustered my courage and stepped out. It was dark. There was a slight breeze, and the area felt heavy. Imagine the feeling of resistance of walking in a heavy wind, but without the wind to justify the resistance. I shuffled down to the embankment to the closet, took a deep breath and opened the door. The lamp only lit half the space, and I didn't enjoy that. Fortunately for me, the board was in the first box I opened. We kept it wrapped in a purple alpaca wool shawl with moons and stars on it, that I got from the man that gave me the crucifix, with the intention of keeping it both tucked away and relatively place-sated. The shawl was super soft, and the board said it should be cleaned with a silk cloth before use. Unfortunately for me, the shawl was half unwrapped, and the naked board was hanging out in the cold. I picked it up by the covered part and wrapped it up. I took one step and something happened. I say something because it felt like I stumbled, but I didn't. I was anticipating everything and didn't want to drop the board or anything, so I was moving slowly and deliberately. But I put my foot down and braced myself from falling over. The second step was the same. I can't really describe it because I didn't feel a hand or a shove, and my feet didn't slip or slide, but my balance was all over. I carefully climbed up the embankment and went back in and set the board in the spot I had made for it. I unwrapped it, placed my Bible directly between me and it, sat down, put my hands flat on my desk and went for it. I tried to cast out the evil and bind the board with the most powerful, clear and distinct language I could. As soon as I was done speaking, the heavy feeling that had been lingering vanished. I wrapped up the board and asked Kaylee if it worked. She smiled and nodded, closed her eyes, and said that she could feel the light again, and the feeling of being trapped was gone. Now there's one last wrinkle I want to leave you with, and I swear to you, it's true. The night before it all happened, I had a dream. In that dream, I ran onto a pier through the ocean, through a fence, and the wind and waves were crashing to get to Kaylee, and I carried her back as the storm winds howled and tried to throw us into the sea. When we made land and took shelter, I opened a door into a pillar and thrust her in ahead of me. Then I went in and found the room full of people in historical garb, some 1920, some earlier. There were about 13, but this was a dream. I do remember clearly a little boy, newsy style, with thick blood coming down from his upper cap, and a very haunting look in his eyes. I opened the door and pulled us both out of the room, and that moment was when I woke up. I delivered pizza during 10 years of college, not a doctor. I delivered 4 large pizzas to an apartment complex. The person that ordered gave us the door code, so we would just enter the building. I had never delivered to this address before, so I just walked up the door and knocked as per usual. I just heard a muffled voice from inside the apartment say, "Come in, door's unlocked." Normally I would never go into someone's house, but it sounded like an old lady, so I entered. What I found inside was equal parts shocking and sad. The woman was laying back in a recliner in the living room. It looked like her body had fused with the fabric due to not moving for days at a time. If it wasn't apparent to me by the piles of empty soda bottles, takeout containers, and pizza boxes that this woman was probably unable to get out of a recliner. The acrid smell that hit your face would have made it obvious. She had me place the boxes of pizza on the armrest of the recliner. She also said that she had never seen me before, and it was usually one of the other drivers that delivered her food. I was new to that store, so I had no idea what to expect there. She signed the card receipt, and before I left I asked if there's anything else I could do to help. And she said that she dropped her phone after she made the call and asked if I could get it for her. I picked it up out of some nearby trash and handed it to her. As I left, I understood why she gave us the door code, because there was no way she was gonna get up to buzz me in. Here's another one I still remember from 10 years ago. There's an elderly woman that ordered 4 medium pizzas and 5 or 6 2-liter Pepsis every Friday. All the drivers fought over her order because she always tipped at least $5 to $10 and was super close to the store. She wasn't overweight or anything, so at best we figured she was an old lady who just didn't want to lug all that soda home from the store, which is fairly common for older folk to order a bunch of pizza at once and just eat it over a few days. One day I show up with all the food, and she had a distressed look on her face. She said, "I hate to trouble you, but can you come in for a second? As I mentioned before, we really weren't supposed to go into people's homes, but she was familiar and super old." She continued, "My husband, he's on the floor." Holy hell. I didn't even know her husband was alive. I'd never seen him before and had delivered at least 15 times. My heart started racing. Am I gonna see a dead body right now? "Okay, sure," I say, as I walk inside. Just to the left of the entryway there was an elderly man slumped over in front of an automatic lifting recliner. She proceeds to say, "My husband slipped out his chair trying to get up and fell onto the floor. Can you help him move back on the chair?" At that moment I sort of saw him shift, like I knew he wasn't gone, and a wave of relief washed over me. But at the same time I was thinking to myself, how the hell am I going to get him on the chair? I could tell he was a stout guy at one point, but withered due to age. I sort of squatted down and pushed his back forwards so I could get behind him. I put my arm under his armpits and joined my hands at his chest. A sound, damn. As I began to lift, he started gasping and wheezing, like I was literally squeezing the soul from his body. I hesitated at first for fear of injury, but realized there was no way I was going to lift him any other way. So I just heaved and got him back onto his chair. I asked if the man was okay and he just looked at me. The woman paid and tipped me $15 before I headed to the door. As I was about to exit, the old man said, "Whoever said those are your golden years is full of crap." That was literally the only thing the guy said. I sat in my car for a minute, just sort of bewildered at what happened, and I felt so bad and was still concerned. I had their phone number on the receipt, so I called them on the way back to the store and asked the woman if he would be okay, and if I needed to call an ambulance. She said, "Oh no, honey, he'll be alright," and that was it. Those were probably the most memorable, but delivering pizza in a college town kinda gets crazy with the hijinks. Once, I auctioned off someone else's pizza to a crowd of drunks at a bar close outside their apartment complex I was delivering to. I just told my manager the person came up and said they ordered it. I paid for the pizza and pocketed the other $30. So this story happened when my family went out to watch my sister's school game, sports thing. I was around 14, and I wasn't feeling great, so stayed home watching Enter the Dragon. While watching the movie, I heard our side door open. The hinges were really creaky, and then it shut. Then about 2 to 3 heavy footsteps, like someone wearing heavy boots, which made sense as this was December in Michigan. I called out again, but this time I was getting the hairs on my arms and legs sticking up. I was spooked, and again nothing. I said, "Nope," and bolted out the back sliding door and didn't see my parents' car they took, then hid in the truck bed that was covered in the front of our house for a sec to see if I could see anyone in the house through the living room window. While I waited, I saw a visible human shadow pass in front of the TV. The curtains were closed, mind you, and I bolted like half a mile to a family friend's house. Not fun, barefoot in winter. They took me in and called the cops after I explained what happened and why I was there. The cops came and checked it out but didn't find anything. No wet footprints in our breezeway that let the slide door or any wet footprints in the house. The side door was also locked, and they even checked for tracks in the snow around the house, but nothing except for my bare footprints running away. I still stand by what I saw and heard, and know it wasn't from the movie itself. The house did and still scares me. My name is Joseph, and I used to live in Folsom, California, the old part. My neighborhood friends were Rob, Kristen, and Robin. I'm on Natoma Street, and they were down at Sibley, Figueroa, and Redding Street. Folsom's been around for ages. Used to be a mining town, gold coming down from Placer, El Dorado, and Amador. It would pass through on its way to San Francisco, so there are a lot of old churches and cemeteries on this side of town, and it's not uncommon to find bones while digging in your yard. Rob lived on Sibley and I on Natoma, and where these streets met are churches and cemeteries. Oh, and a small park in front of his house where we'd kick it. At the time, Rob was dating Kristen, and I had an eye for her friend Robin, which never panned out. But we still hung out as friends, and this is what happened to us one night while hanging out in a graveyard. We walked down Natoma and crossed Folsom Boulevard to hang out in the cemetery where Rob had seen a tombstone with a motorcycle engraving and had the most wonderful idea to whip out a Ouija board and try to speak with the guy. I always thought these things were nonsense. It says Parker Bros on the box, so to me, it's about as scary as playing Monopoly. That night, the weather wasn't great, but not too bad, cloudy with a breeze, and it took forever to get the candles lit. We all had to open our jackets and huddle up to prevent the wind from blowing out the lighter. So it's set up on the guy's tombstone, candles for effect, and we begin. Stupid questions, giggles, the "Hey, I know you guys are moving it." Nobody was taking this seriously. Until the weirdness started. First the wind picks up and the candles don't go out. Easy enough, trick candles. The ones for birthday cakes that are hard to blow out. But these weren't those. Then the rain begins to drizzle. The board isn't really getting wet, but it is coated in wax, right? No, I don't think that was the reason. I mean, raindrops didn't land on the board at all. We started getting pelted by rain, and the board and candles remained as they were. I wish that was the end of it. I was scared, as were the girls, but Rob couldn't be more excited. Then someone says, "What's that?" There are lights at the cemetery, kind of like street lights along the fence and driveway, and we could see something moving about 50 to 60 yards away. A silhouette, a shadow moving from tree to tree, getting closer. It moved really fast. At about 30 yards it passed under a streetlight, and we could see it was just a blob of black, and we all ran. Rob's fastest, and I'm behind the girls, keeping that thing over my shoulder, following the star on Rob's starter jacket. We're running in the dark in between tombstones and trees, making our way to the front gate, when I felt something grab my leg. It was the chain that ran along the top of the posts at the driveway, but I thought it had me when I looked front to see where I was going. I broke the chain and wrapped around my leg. I ran across Folsom Boulevard with one of the posts still attached, and when I stopped to pull it off, I realized that I had wet myself. I don't remember if we met up in the park or if we just ran all the way home, but I'm glad that that thing didn't cross the street. I'm sure for them, that was that, but it didn't end for me. I ruined a pair of jeans that I'd have to explain. I had a deep bruise around my throat I'd have to explain, but what I couldn't explain was the damn Ouija board in my room. We ran. I didn't go back for it, and neither did they, but I'm crapping myself because it's sitting on my bed. I'd rather get caught with a dime bag or a dirty magazine than this. This is totally forbidden in my house, and now I had to hide it until garbage day. I took all the garbage bags out of the can and put it on the bottom and stacked the bags on top. Job done. Nope. At some point, it's back in my room. We had a cord of firewood on the side of the house, so I wedged it in tight and stacked logs on it, totally hidden till garbage day, and managed to get it out the can before anyone could notice. But then it was back again. At this point I'm terrified. I threw it in a field, hid it in a friend's house, to no avail. My last attempt to get rid of it worked. I took my nan's rosary and a few things precious to me but worth it, buried it in the graveyard of the old church downtown, and said out loud, "This is holy ground, and if anyone can hear me, please keep this thing away from me." I don't know if it stayed put, but it never came back to me. I'm still fearful of these things. When I'm watching paranormal TV shows, I'll fast forward or skip an episode because I don't even want the image on my TV. Since then, I've seen stuff that will make your hair fall out and fracture your sense of self, or maybe just break your soul. But perhaps it's only me. I used to deliver to a guy's house. Nice place, a wall of 20+ foot trees to hide the house, and 2 Mercedes in the driveway. Always a good tipper. His house got raided by the feds and they took all his stuff, plus pounds of weed. And somehow he continued to order like clockwork every week. No idea how he didn't go to jail. Weird side note, this guy would always answer the door stinking like weed even after the arrest. And he has these weird female mannequins with designer clothes on them all over the house. Like when you pull up, it looks like he's having a party. But it's actually just Home Alone deja vu and there are weird mannequins everywhere. Other than that, it's just your typical rednecks, houses full of trash, and people clearly on heavy drugs. I was devastated when my father passed away, and I wasn't there to say goodbye as I lived in a different state. After the funeral and I returned home, I started to find rusty quarters, not just 1 or 2 but about 15. They were in the oddest places, like my bed, the guest toilet, the seat of my car, in the driveway. There were too many in such a short span of time that I had mentioned it to a friend, and she told me sometimes loved ones who have passed will send signs to let you know they're okay. I pondered that explanation and wondered if it were true and that my father was still around me. A few days later, my best friend invited me to go to my favorite secret beach. I was having a hard day and was just down, thinking about my dad. Before I walked out the door, I said to my empty house, "Dad, if it is you, I could use a quarter, and I will know you are always with me, and I'll never doubt it." I really wasn't expecting a rusty quarter to appear. We arrive at the beach. It was a sheltered cove and nobody else was there except us. It was a cove I loved snorkeling at, but it was low tide, so I lounged in water at the shore. My friend is an avid crab hunter, catching them on the rocks and then letting them go. He told me to stop moping and come catch crabs with him. Reluctantly, I agreed. I set my sights on a small crab, and he scurried under an overhanging rock. I reached my hand back in the cave and stooped up the sand. I was sure I had caught him, but when I opened my hand, I saw a rusty quarter and cried. I still have 16 rusty quarters, and to some, that's all they are. But to me, that's proof that I'm not alone, and that my dad is okay. I've had a few weird encounters while delivering pizza. An extremely large man naked on his bed telling me to come in. I yelled that I wouldn't like to do that, and he replied, "Oh, it's a girl. Why'd they send a girl if we knew the situation there?" The second was I delivered to a trucker in his rig. He berated me for having a single nose piercing and coloured hair, because he had a son with all them piercings, and all he does is drugs now. Then the man texted me, "Can I ask you a silly question?" I had called him to find a specific rig for the delivery, you see, and I ignored him and blocked him, and he called the store manager asking for me specifically to return and bring him a specific sauce packet. My manager said no and had me stay in the store with the crew until it was time to leave. Who knows what he had planned for me. When I was in 11th grade, I took the bus to school from a cluster of small towns that had about 100 people on each. One of the students was permanently in an electric wheelchair and had muscular and skeletal issues that caused her to grow abnormally and had low muscle control. This particular day, we had a replacement bus driver. It was their first day. Every time the bus would stop and begin moving again, there was a loud grinding sound that came from under us. I was in the second to last seat before the wheelchair lift, right on top of the rear wheels, about halfway to school. We stopped and once again began moving, and there was no grinding noise for a moment, and then boom. The 5 to 6 of us in the back who were the oldest looked at each other for a second, before smoke started billowing out from under us. That was our "we gotta get out of here" moment. My sister, 14, and her friend of 15 immediately started getting the kids off the bus, while my brother of 17 and I of 16 got the chairlift down, only to discover the power had gotten cut and we weren't told how to operate it manually. So we picked up our wheelchaired friend and got her out through the back door. We ended up having to put rocks around the tires as the bus driver had kept his foot on the brake to keep it from rolling. A man in a car behind us went under the bus with a fire extinguisher to put out a small fire around the back wheel. In the end, I wrote down all the kids who were on the bus, who had gone home with their parents and who were picked up by the next bus. My principal cried when I gave her the notebook because they didn't know who was accounted for. We were recognized by the school board for how we acted in the scenario at our next assembly. There used to be this one house that was always under construction in my neighborhood. No joke. For 6 to 7 years, this massive house was being renovated. The parents were incredibly wealthy, and by the time the house was done, it was stunning. I'd always worked or driven by this house, but never met the owners. And one day, as if some pizza angel had heard my delivery prayers, I was given to deliver at that house. I was excited because I figured I would get a tip from the wealthy owners. Wrong. I got a hot dog. I arrived and knocked on the door, and these 2 dudes, both juniors or seniors in high school, opened in their underwear. I was like, "That'll be $20.15. "Yeah, I've got your cash, it's inside," and they invited me in. Normally I don't enter the customers' homes, but I was really curious to see the inside. I walked in avoiding eye contact with these two guys and went into the kitchen. They had 3 or 4 exotic birds flying around their house, and the 2 gentlemen were cooking raw hot dogs in a saucepan. They said they had to finish the hot dogs before they could pay me. It was a slow day and I didn't mind waiting. They cook up a few hot dogs, pay me for the pizza, and then asked if I wanted to have a threesome. I was eating the hot dog and choked a little bit. I'm a guy and didn't know how to react. I said that I was good, but they insisted, and I started walking to the door and they followed me, chanting, "Threesome, threesome." I booked it, burnt rubber out the driveway, and in hindsight, I think they were playing a prank on me, but it was still weird as hell. When my mum was 18, she was hit by a city truck that had run a red light. Her collarbone was crushed, and she had slammed her head against the window so hard that paramedics had declared her dead at the scene. Despite being revived in the ambulance, her parents were called and told that she had died, and the local news station also reported the incident as having ended her life. When she arrived in hospital, she was alive but unconscious. She remained in a coma for several weeks before waking up in a confused state. At the time, she could not remember what had happened to her in the moments leading up to the incident, nor could she recall anything from the comatose. My mother was sent to a rehabilitation center previously used as a tuberculosis ward in the 60s. While there, she was horribly mistreated by hospital staff, and even recalls being molested and watched while taking showers. I'm a firm believer in the idea that some people, in order to heal from traumatic events, choose to not remember them at all. I also believed up until recently that this was the coping mechanism my mum used to overcome the trauma surrounding her incident. However, recently my mum started seeing a therapist in an attempt to unlock her memories from the event in order for her to heal from them further. She called me a few nights ago after waking from a dream in which she could recall her comatose state. The following is what she told me she could remember. She told me she remembered hearing people's voices around her parents crying and my father staying by her side the entire time, unwilling to leave even for a second. She remembers hearing many voices constantly and being unable to respond to them. She remembers feeling trapped in her body, unable to move or tell anyone what was going on. She says she can remember waking up and still feeling trapped for a long time, while her body began to adjust to life again. She told me it was the most painful, miserable experience of her life, but that she was so grateful that she could remember it because she had always been racking her brains for those memories she knew she had. Moral of the story: if someone you care about is in a coma, talk to them, even if you know they can't respond. The sound of your voice will calm them and let them know that you are there. A co-worker and my friend got a delivery one night before he left, and our manager pulled him into the office and gave him a pair of latex gloves and instructed him to use them to put the money in an envelope. He was confused and didn't ask any questions. He says when he got to the house, there was an actual caution tape around the yard and a sign that said something like "Warning Infestation." He is somewhat of a germaphobe to begin with, so at that point he really doesn't want to go up to the door, but he asks to deliver the pizza. The woman who answers the door is grotesque, covered in red splotches and potentially bites of some kind. He hands her the pizza, carefully takes the money with the envelope, and stuffs it in and sprints back to the car. He throws a fit when he got back to the store, and the manager felt so bad she put the house on the blacklist. He said he scrubbed his hands till they were red. Think it was bed bugs or scabies or something, but we'll never know. My 23-year-old mother was murdered when I was a baby. It happened in our house and nobody knew what actually happened. Throughout my life, there have been times where I feel like she's around, and the last few weeks, I felt like it non-stop. I don't have any form of audio or video to prove this, but I feel her, and I've seen her in dreams for years. So for a little backstory, her life was tragically cut short in 1998. I was 2 and the youngest of 3 children. I was the only one home when she died. My dad, brother and sister were on a mini trip for the week. I think why I feel her, and my siblings haven't, is because when she passed away, she knew I was still home, and I think she wanted to protect me, and just hasn't ever left. So the house I mentioned where my mum's life was cut short, I used to see shadow figures pretty commonly. I never saw her, but I felt her presence from time to time since I was a kid. And I would see shadow figures, and at one point I drew them, but the drawings are on an iPad that is now broken. The 2 main ones I would see were a shadow figure wearing a hat, which I've read is pretty common. I never saw eyes nor face. It was just that, a dark mouse. This was always seen in the downstairs bedroom. The other shadow figure I would see a lot was a long, lanky one. I don't think I've read about them, but they were long and seemed to be slouched down. They usually looked like they have their heads held down like they were sad. Sometimes I would see 2 or 3 of these at once. I never saw these in my bedroom, almost always on the main floor of the house, and even if I looked at them, it's like they needed me to see them. Kind of rarely, but sometimes around the house I would see the hooded shadow figure, who again I think is a common one. The hats and hooded shadows always seem scary, but not the lanky sad ones. I wouldn't go near them if I saw them, but I never felt scared or hid when I did. So, there's been a time I've seen a ghost as well. I was in my bedroom upstairs. I remember I woke up and saw a bright ghost. I could see his face and uniform, and he told me to get out, which is when I moved my bedroom from upstairs to downstairs. The ghost almost appeared to look like a Civil War or colonial man. I'm not a history person, but he was definitely old-timey. The last story is one of my brother's friends that used to come over all the time and would always hang out in the basement. The basement was unfinished when we moved in, but we finished it, and the bathroom in the basement was always scary to me. It always felt like I was being watched in there, even though I never saw anything. So anyway, my brother's friend one day went in there and ran out and had my dad call his parents to pick him up. We didn't know why for many years, until one day he told us that he saw a full-bodied apparition of an old man with a big beard in there. After that, he never returned to our house. After we moved, I've never seen a shadow or ghost. It's been 7 years now. I still feel my mum's presence, like I used to, in the old house. Prior to my freshman year of college, I was delivering pizzas for Pizza Hut in a decent suburb outside of Cleveland. I was the typical stoner/partier, easygoing delivery guy. As a little background, one afternoon my manager requested I go change several $100s for smaller bills for our register. As I'm leaving the bank after getting the change and getting into my car, I sense someone approach from behind and suspect they're going to ask me for a cigarette. Nope. Instead it's a dude with pantyhose on his head and a knife and demanding the money I have in my pocket and my keys. I oblige and he ultimately runs off and tosses my keys in the parking lot where I can see them. When I run into the bank, no one at all saw the incident, and wouldn't you know, when they pull the footage, there is sun glare in the exact spot on the window where my car was parked. The cops interrogate me and search the car, but seem to conclude that in fact I was telling the truth. My manager even vouched for me, saying how I was a good kid. Fast forward 10 years and I'm telling the story at a party and bam, it hits me. My manager, who often dates unsavory characters, set up the whole thing. Considering I was robbed in front of the bank in broad daylight on the busiest street in my town, who the hell would know to rob me? Especially since I hadn't put my car topper on at this point. So while I was an undergrad, I worked as a pizza delivery driver. I had to deliver to a dodgy part of town with a delicious pie. When I got within a couple of miles of the residence, a local sheriff's deputy got in front of me. We made all the same turns, then as we got closer, another got in front of him and one behind me. I start freaking out a bit, as I've been smoking some weed, but carry on. Finally, we get to the same residence, which is totally surrounded by police, in riot gear, guns drawn and all that stuff. I get out with my pizza and discover the house I'm supposed to deliver to is the one with SWAT out in front. One of the officers waves to me and says, "He's not gonna need that pizza today," as they proceed to breach the door, to which I return to the car with a free pizza and get the hell out of there. They were added to our do not deliver list, but I don't think we ever heard from them again. I drove for Domino's in college and had to deliver to a house in a bad part of town. There were no lights on outsides at all, and the grass looked like it hadn't been cut in months. I have to use my phone flashlight to find my way to the door. I knock, and this elderly woman answers wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt. She had one eye that was good and one that was completely glazed over. She never said a word and kept eye contact with me the entire time. She fumbled through her wallet and gave me the exact change. Meanwhile, inside, there's a very large man and a little kid. They were both only wearing boxers, and the kid kept trying to run up to help the woman with the sodas and pizza, and the guy kept yelling to sit his ass down. All the while, the woman is silent and staring into my soul. I wish I could say it was a one-time deal, but no. I delivered there a few more times after that, and it was the exact same drill every time. Just felt like something from the Twilight Zone. So the issue with calling CPS is that it honestly didn't cross my mind, because all I saw is what I stated. Neither the woman nor child had any sorts of cuts nor bruises or markings to show physical abuse. The woman's eye seemed like it had been that way for a while, and it didn't strike me as a possible abuse injury at the time. I was an exhausted college student with closing shift, and I was just trying to get in and out so that I could make more deliveries. It was quite hot outside yesterday, and I was bored, so decided to go to McDonald's with my friend. Things were normal at first, and as I mentioned, the heat made me want to roll down my window halfway through the drive. Halfway there, we changed our plans and decided it would be best to go to Subway. I made a detour in order to get to the one closest. As I turned from a side street back onto the main one, I realized I had to make a left turn to get to the Subway, so I looked to see if I could switch lanes into the center one for turning. Unexpectedly, there was a scraggy man crossing the middle of the street with no crosswalk in sight. Traffic was also especially bad, since it was currently the College World Series season. He looked like a lot of people you'd find walking around aimlessly with dark, dusty-looking clothes and a very worn-looking red bag, plus a bright red cap that covered his eyes. He seemed like he was on something too, since he had decided to cross such a busy street during prime hours, but I'm not so sure about that. Now this happens sometimes where I'm from, especially on this street in particular, and I'm used to it, so I slow down until they're safely out my way before I carry on going. With that, I merge into the center lane, where he had already started to cross onto the other side. Mind you, I was nowhere near him, but he slowly turned around and started charging towards my car as if I had tried to ram him. He was yelling and cursing for some reason. I didn't know why he was angry. I quickly pulled up my window and made sure the doors were locked. As he got right next to my car, he knocked on my window while yelling at me to get out, but I kept on going since it was just my turn to leave. I heard a ton of honking and a lot more yelling as I turned into the parking lot, so I assumed he had crossed the street and moved on with his day. However, before I could park, my friend told me that we should probably hightail it out of there because he was waiting for us to get out from across the street. Some cars were blocking my view, so I moved up a bit, and sure enough, the red cap was there, and he was glaring very intently at us. I knew something was wrong, and that I could be in real danger. and that feeling was enough to convince me that I shouldn't even entertain the idea of getting a healthy sandwich. So I made a turn and got the hell out of there, before something could happen to one of us. I knew that if I made a left turn, there was a stop sign right there, so my buddy would have to have become his target. So I went right and stepped on the gas. Lo and behold, I start driving away when I see this man actually attempting to run up to my car. He was yelling something, but my buddy turned on the AC so loud we couldn't hear it. Needless to say, I was freaked out of it at this point, so I kept driving, until I knew I was way out of range, even though there was no way the guy could catch up with us. I don't know how long he followed me for, because I didn't look back until we were a good 5 blocks away. I'm glad I know my streets though, because we ended up at the McDonald's we'd planned to go in the first place, and nothing mollifies me like a large fry. I thought about it for a while I was eating, and was quite rattled. Who knows what he would have done if we had decided to park at the Subway, or worse, if he actually got to stick his hand into my open window like he'd been attempting to. I'd been warned that that would happen in the sketchier neighborhoods when I'd been learning to drive, but this was the first time I ever experienced anything like that, and I was quite shocked. Who knows what he could have had in his pockets or his bag, and the look on his face was one that implied he simply did not want to apologize or exchange pleasantries on a Saturday afternoon. This is one of the weirdest stories I had delivering pizza. Just after a hot girl quit, for whatever reason, I was given her regular shift. Late that shift at around 10:30, I went to deliver, and this old dude came out in a short bathrobe. The robe only went past his balls and his chest was open. Lucky for me. What his clothes didn't cover was his all-natural homegrown carpet. Dude was hairy. So anyway, he opens the door, does the cool guy pose with his arms up in the door frame, looks over and goes, "Oh, you're not the hot chick." I then understood why she quit. Another story. Delivering to this absolute stunning beachfront home, the man answered the door completely nude and commented on how nice the view was. Another time, the dude asked me to put the food on the table while he got the money. The table had a massive bag of weed, scales, and a bunch of little bags. I was caught between doing what he asked and pretended I didn't see anything. Then I delivered to a house, and the topic of pay came up, and the people started a full-blown argument that ended with the pizza being thrown on the floor. One old guy eventually paid and apologized. They lost a big court battle today. Sad thing was, he paid by card, and this is back when that meant I had to call the store and read his card details, so it took forever. On another occasion, I parked outside the curb of a neighbor's house, and the old owner came out and told me that I could never do that again. For the record, this is a public road that I parked on. He didn't own it. So next time I went to that house, his curb was only a few spots for 100 meters either way. So I think, I'll be quick. The old dude literally used a laser pointer and aimed for my eyes as I was driving away with his revenge. What a creep. When I was 12, my mum and I went to the ER. She didn't feel well and asked me to fetch the paperwork from her car. I walk alone to our car in the parking lot, and you hear these ladies outside the hospital yell, "What are you doing? You better stay away from that little girl." I didn't have to put two and two together, reach the car, and by the time I turn around I see my mum walking up on this guy who's right behind me. My mum is a tough-looking chick, so when she asked him what the hell he was doing, he scrambled for an answer and said he was going to ask me for a ride. She yelled at him and says, "Does she look like she's old enough to give you a ride?" That guy disappeared there and then. I'm 22 now, and it still scares the life out of me to think what would have happened if those random ladies weren't outside looking out for me. What would have happened indeed? I delivered pizzas briefly for Little Caesar's Pizza in the very early noughties, being 19 or 20 at the time, and from the waspy suburbs, I had a lot to learn about how people on the other side of the tracks lived. I got a delivery to a particularly seedy flophouse motel. 2 of the $5 pepperoni pizzas that usually get paid for with $11, so not really worth delivering. But it was maybe 2 to 3 miles away, and I could be back quickly, and I'd be able to get out of the store, so win-win. I pull up to the hotel, and after a bit of wandering around, I find the room the customer was in. A man of maybe 55 to 60 years answered the door with no shirt on, and his entire torso covered in a bandage that had an ominous-looking stain seeping through. He invited me into the room. I set the pizzas down, and as he was paying me, he told me that he had come to the city from some other state to have a medical procedure. After I get my $11 from the pizza, he asks me if I can help him change his pus-soaked bandages. No thanks, sir. Have a good night. This happened about 2 years ago, and still scares me when I think about it. First, a little background. My name's Jesse and I live in the UK, and I'm from a smallish area, nothing fancy. I'm 18, and at the time of this story I was 16 and working at a family friend's pub collecting glasses. I'd worked from 7 till 11 at night, and lived about a half an hour away to 45 minutes. To get home, I had to walk through a park. Now, this park has 3 entrances. 2 at the top, and 1 at the bottom, which leads into the town/center and main shopping area. The top 2 lead to 2 different areas. One is a skate park, and the other is literally right next to a comprehensive school in a big field. This school has a lot of bushes and trees in it, and only has a few lights. The only lights are on the lampposts outside each entrance to the park, which are very dimly lit. Each entrance was a big gate, and they were always open. It's important to note this for later. I had to walk the path that leads towards the school, since it was the fastest way home. Now onto the story. I worked at the pub for a year, and had stuck to the same routine going home. I'd leave around 11, sometimes a few minutes before something, sometimes a few minutes before, sometimes a few minutes after. And it took about 10 minutes to get to the park, so I'd be walking through the park at around 11:30, give or take. Now the one entrance I had to use to get into the park was the one at the bottom, the one that leads to the shopping area. It had 1 lamppost outside the gate, and that was it. That was the only light, so I could see about 10 foot into the park, and there was a few benches. No one was ever in the park when I walked through it from work. During the autumn/winter weeks, it was always empty, even the streets were. So you could imagine my shock when I saw a man sitting on the bench as I walked through the park gates. Now this was so strange. Around 1:15 to midnight, almost 12, it's pitch black and freezing, and this dude is just chilling on the bench. I couldn't see him too well at first, but as I got closer I got a good look at him. He was young, 20 to 25, long hair in a ponytail, but not a scruffy one. It was tight and neat. He had a hoop earring and his nose was pierced. I couldn't remember his eye color. He was so pale, with jet black hair with red tips, which went past his shoulders. He wore all black and dressed a bit like an emo. Looking back now, he reminds me and kind of looks like Dracula from the movie Van Helsing. He was on his phone and looked up at me as I walked towards him, and he just stared at me as I walked past. I gave him a slight courteous nod and smile and carried on going. He just looked me up and down with a smirk, which unsettled me. He didn't say anything and I managed to get home and didn't think much of it and forgot all about it. The next night I went to work. I finished my shift and walked through the park, and again, there he was. He was on his phone, wearing all black hair in a ponytail. He looked up to see me and smiled. I smiled back, but walked a bit faster past him. Again, he said nothing. This happened the next night, but on the fourth he wasn't there. I walked through the park as usual, but I felt so uneasy. It was pitch black, no lights except for the moon, and what do I hear? Footsteps, quick footsteps behind me. So I turn around and see nothing. I wasn't taking any chances though, so I ran through the park, and I swear over the sound of my heart beating fast and my footsteps, I could hear the sound of twigs snapping and leaves crunching. After that, I started getting a lift home for about 2 weeks from a friend. Then, that friend went on vacation, so I had to start walking home through the park again. The first night, which was Monday, the man wasn't there, but I still felt uneasy, like I was being watched. And on the second he was, sitting on that same bench, smiling at me. But this time he spoke, in a very deep voice. "Hey baby, love the tights and skirt. Damn." I was wearing a black skirt and sheer tights, with thick black thigh high socks, and Doc Martens with a black biker jacket and a thick scarf. I had to wear all black for work, and I looked at him awkwardly, smiled and hurried away. The next few weeks, he'd be in the park and made lewd comments, and always sat on the bench. I'd try and get lifts home where I could, but there would always be times I'd need to go through the park. Lord, I hated that walk. One night, things escalated. I walked through the park as usual, and again he was there, sitting smiling at me. I did my best to ignore him, and he made comments about my body and what he wanted to do to me. As I was walking away, I was out of the light and could only see 2 to 3 feet in front of me. I must have been about 20 feet away when I hear running behind me and turn around. Someone runs at me at full speed and knocks me to the floor. I feel a heavy weight on me, and instantly I feel hair on my face and a hand over my mouth. A familiar deep voice in front of me tells me not to fight it, and that if I don't, it'll be over quicker. That's when his hands start to wander. I can hear his zipper, and that's when I know what's coming. He's mentioning how he's been waiting to do this for so long, and he took his hand off my mouth, and that's when I took my chance and bit him really hard. He screamed. He sat up, and I could barely see what I was doing, but I took that opportunity and pushed him off me and started to run, and heard him running after me. I got to the first gate that I usually leave by and was mortified to see it was locked. I could see it had a lock on it because the lamppost on the other side shone onto the usually open gate. I was so confused, but I could hear him shouting and started to run again, and I ran towards the other gate. It was closed, but not all the way. There was a small gap, and I just squeezed through it, leading to the skate park. He tried to grab me, and I turned and looked at him for a few seconds, catching my breath. He stared at me, and then started to try and fit through the gate, so I booked it as fast as I could. I ran towards the skate park. The skate park was full of bushes on one side of the path that ran through it. It also had a long dark path which after about 20 minutes leads to a main road, but it's usually completely empty. I ran through the skate park and hid in the bushes waiting for him, since if I had run onto the path I'd be visible and he'd be able to see me and chase me, and since no one was around I'd stand no chance. The path that leads to the road had very few lights, but still had enough so he'd see me and be able to follow me. I sat in the bush, hiding, hand over my mouth. I sat there for a minute when I saw him running through the skate park looking for me. He slowed down near the exit path, which led to a long path, and he stood there for a minute just sniffing the air. No joke, he was sniffing it. His hair wasn't in a ponytail anymore. It was all over him. He wasn't wearing a coat. He wore a long-sleeved shirt that was all black. It was winter, which confused me since it was so damn cold. And he looked around, and I felt his eyes scan me. Then he kept looking and started walking down the long path. After about 10 minutes, I felt it was safe and ran back towards the park, and ran into the park and ran to the gate I usually go through to get home. It was still locked, so I just climbed over it. I walked towards the school following the path I always used to, and had a strange urge to look back. And there he was. At the gate, the man was just standing, just watching me. He laughed and said, "I'll catch you one day, baby girl, mark my words." He blew me a kiss and walked away into the darkness. I've never been so scared in all my life. I booked it home and told my mom what happened. She called the police and council and asked why the fence was locked. The council were just as confused as we were because the gate was never supposed to be locked, ever. The police couldn't do much. They put a warning out and that was about it. The creepy thing was he had to have learned my pattern. He had to have known I used the park every night to get home. It creeps me out to this day, knowing I was being watched and could have been assaulted or worse. I still have nightmares from time to time about him, and wonder what would have happened to me had I not gotten away, or had he seen me in the bushes. I stopped working at the pub, and haven't used the park since. I delivered for Papa John's back in '93, and we had a big ice storm through the night. The manager calls me to see if I'd come in. I said I'd try, even though I lived further away than anyone else, and my car was a 5-speed manual as well. Not a soul on the roads. I get there and it's just him taking orders and making pizzas. It wasn't a lot since most people assumed everything was closed, and they were except us. I take a call from a dude that wasn't too far away, and he asked if I could stop to buy him a pack of cigs. I found a shop that was open and dropped his stuff off with no tip. Then we get a big order from CP and Telephone, now Verizon. Bunch of hills and stuff to get to the parking lot, and then I carried a huge stack of pizzas 100 yards across the icy parking lot. I hit the buzzer and waited for a bit while my arms were about to fall off, and they finally opened the door and gave me a check for the exact change. No tip after everything I went through. They always had free delivery, now hiring drivers up to 18 plus per hour on the sign outside. So I think people thought we made money from just delivering pizzas. We got minimum wage and used our own cars. This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and a firearm for protection, and jumped into my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot, and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, mostly like a deer with some lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and too dark, so I couldn't really go find it to put it out of its misery. Thinking nothing of it after that, and about to go eat my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag, and I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, then I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after. like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to what I assume is about the middle of the clearing and stops. I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. There's nothing but trees and darkness. What the hell? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing. Just the crickets and the breeze, and I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and try not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my firearm. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to the left. I'm up now, wondering what I am hearing, if it's real, and if it's just a product of me being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple of other directions, all different. Old men, old women, and even children. And that confirms it's real. The noises are closing in. I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot in the air in case they come too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through the woods. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the wildlife was now dead quiet. Not even the wind was making a noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, and listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit, and figuring that I'd scared whatever the hell that was off, I sat down in my exhausted state and fell asleep. I wake up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, I grab my firearm and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent again, so I shout out, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, which illuminated several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my weapon, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up, sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was, and I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulders the entire way. I never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I left all my gear in the woods that same night.